Ease. You want to know what they took from me? Ethan's voice cracked, his ribs so broken he could barely breathe. Ease. They didn't take the garage. They took my father's bike. The last thing I had left of him. He wiped blood from his lip and looked at the wreckage around him. And that was the last mistake Victor Kane will ever make. If this story moves you, if you believe justice still exists in this world, subscribe to the channel right now and follow every part until the end. Drop your city in the comments below. Let me see how far this story travels. Silver Creek, Arizona sat in the kind of heat that made people move slow and think hard. It was the sort of town where everyone knew what time the diner opened, where the sheriff's cruiser parked on Tuesday afternoons, and which mechanic you called when your truck gave out on Route 9 at 2 in the morning. Most people called Ethan Walker. He was 27 years old with grease permanently embedded under his fingernails and a reputation that stretched 40 miles in every direction. He's tall, lean, with blonde hair that needed cutting and eyes, the color of faded denim. Ethan didn't look like anything special at first glance. That was part of what people liked about him. He wasn't trying to be anything other than what he was. He's a mechanic, a man who showed up, a man who kept his word. His shop sat on the western edge of town, where the highway curved toward the desert like a scar across the earth. He's Walker's Garage. Hand-painted sign, one hydraulic lift that groaned every time he used it. 3 bays, 2 of which leaked when it rained. A small office in the back with a refrigerator that held more motor oil than food and a photograph taped above the workbench that Ethan never talked about but never moved. The photograph showed a younger man on a motorcycle. Big frame, dark beard, leather vest with patches, one hand raised toward the camera like he was waving someone off. That man was James Walker, Ethan's father, dead 6 years. And the motorcycle beside Ethan's workbench, the '72 Harley-Davidson Sportster stripped down to its bones, frame hanging from a chain mount that was James Walker's machine. The one Ethan had been restoring piece by piece for 3 years. That bike was the most important thing in Ethan's world. He worked on it in the quiet hours, before customers arrived and after they left. He sourced parts from salvage yards in 4 states. He'd rebuilt the carburetor twice, sourced the original chrome fenders from a dealer in Tucson who charged him 3 times what they were worth. He'd paid it, every cent, because when that motorcycle finally ran again, his father would live again in some small mechanical way. Ethan didn't talk about that to anyone. He talked about carburetors, timing chains, the right torque on a cylinder head bolt. That was the language he used instead of grief. His shop opened at 6 every morning, and he rarely locked up before 9 at night. He charged less than any shop within 30 miles, and when someone genuinely couldn't pay, he had a habit of forgetting to send the invoice. Word got around. Farmers brought him their equipment. Truckers detoured off the highway specifically to use his shop. Veterans from the small military community outside town trusted him with machines they'd owned longer than their marriages. Rosa Delgado had been Ethan's only employee for 2 years. 32, sharp-tongued and mechanical in a way that surprised people who didn't expect it. She handled intake the books and could diagnose an electrical problem faster than most mechanics twice her age. She and Ethan had the kind of working relationship that didn't require many words. She knew when to hand him a wrench without being asked. He knew when she needed the radio turned up because her sister had called with bad news again. "You know you're losing money on the Henderson's truck," Rosa said one morning, dropping a clipboard on the workbench beside him. Again, they've got 3 kids and a bad harvest this year," Ethan said without looking up. "That's not our problem. It is today." He tightened a bolt and moved to the next one. "Send them the invoice for parts only. Float the labor." Rosa made a sound that wasn't quite agreement and wasn't quite protest. She picked up the clipboard and walked back toward the office. At the door, she stopped. "You do this every time someone's having a hard season." "People helped my dad when he had nothing," Ethan said. "That's why I'm here." She left it alone. That was the kind of man Ethan Walker was. And in a town like Silver Creek, that kind of man was rare enough that people noticed. He wasn't loud about it. He wasn't religious about it. He simply lived the way his father had told him to live. Pay it forward. Work hard. Stand firm when it mattered. He had no idea how much standing firm was about to cost him. Victor Kane came to Silver Creek. The way bad weather comes to the desert, slow at first, barely noticeable, and then overwhelming before you've had time to prepare. He was 41, heavyset, with a particular kind of confidence that comes not from accomplishment, but from never having faced real consequences. He'd grown up in Phoenix, moving between small criminal operations and using people the way other people use tools. He had a crew of 8 men who called themselves the Kane Outfit, though locally they were known by less organized names. His enforcers: muscle, trouble. Victor's operation was simple on the surface. He identified small businesses in secondary markets towns off the main circuit, places where law enforcement was understaffed and residents were too spread out to organize effectively. He moved in. He offered protection, and if the owner refused, he demonstrated exactly what they needed protection from. It was a cycle he'd run a dozen times across 3 states. Silver Creek caught his attention for one specific reason. Ethan Walker's garage sat adjacent to a highway intersection that Victor's people had been using as a waypoint for transferring stolen vehicles. The arrangement worked as long as nobody looked too closely at the traffic patterns. But with the garage operating openly, customers coming and going at all hours, Victor decided he needed the property. Not just as a pass-through, as a base. A legitimate-looking mechanic shop with a reason for vehicles to arrive at irregular hours was exactly the kind of cover his operation needed. He sent 2 men to the garage on a Tuesday afternoon in March. Ethan was under a Peterbilt cab doing brake line work when he heard them come in. He heard them because they didn't make any effort to be quiet. That was intentional. Men who want to be heard before they speak are making a statement. He rolled out from under the truck and stood up. They were both large. One of them had tattoos up both forearms and a way of standing that took up more space than necessary. The other wore a button-down shirt and held a manila folder, which was somehow more unsettling than the tattoos. "He's Ethan Walker," the one with the folder said. "That's me. We represent a business interest that's been looking at property acquisitions in this corridor." He opened the folder and set it on the workbench beside Ethan's tools. "Your property is one we'd like to discuss." Ethan didn't look at the folder. He looked at the man's face. "I'm not selling," the man smiled. "You haven't heard the offer." "Doesn't matter what the offer is." Ethan wiped his hands on a shop rag and tossed it over his shoulder. "This was my father's property. It'll be mine until I'm done with it." "That's a sentimental position," the man said. "In our experience, sentiment has a price. Not here." The man with the tattoos picked up a wrench from Ethan's toolbox. Just picked it up, turned it over, set it back down. It was the kind of gesture that meant something without meaning anything in particular. A demonstration of access. "Mr. Kane would like the opportunity to meet with you directly," the man with the folder said. "Tomorrow evening, to present his proposal." "Tell Mr. Kane I'm booked solid," Ethan said. He picked up the wrench the tattooed man had touched and put it back exactly where it belonged in his toolbox. "You're welcome to make an appointment if you need work done on a vehicle." They left. Rosa appeared from the office doorway the moment their car cleared the lot. "Who were they?" "Nobody important yet," Ethan said. He went back under the truck. Rosa stood in the doorway for a long moment before she said, "You know that's not true." He didn't answer, but she was right. Victor Kane arrived the next day anyway. He didn't make an appointment. He drove a black Escalade with tinted windows and 2 additional vehicles behind him, which meant he brought 5 men total plus himself. He walked into the garage like he owned the floor he was standing on. Ethan was in the second bay working on the Sportster. Victor watched him for a moment before speaking. "Nice old bike," Victor said. Ethan straightened and turned around. "Don't touch it." Victor's expression shifted. He wasn't used to that tone from people in the first 30 seconds. "You must be the mechanic who thinks he can say no to me." "I'm the mechanic who already said no to you. Yesterday." Victor walked closer. He was taller than Ethan, but heavier and slower. He had the kind of physical presence built on intimidation rather than fitness. His eyes did a slow circuit of the garage, the tools, the bays, the Sportster, the photograph on the wall. "It's your father's place," Victor said. He nodded at the photograph. "Biker." "My shop," Ethan said. "Not for sale." "Everything's for sale," Victor said pleasantly. "The question is just how much discomfort someone's willing to absorb before they figure out the price." "You should leave," Ethan said. There was nothing aggressive in his voice. Just flat certainty. Victor looked at him for a long moment. Then he smiled. He turned and walked out. His men filed out behind him. Rosa came to stand beside Ethan. She watched the vehicles pull out onto the highway. He's going to be a problem." "Yes," Ethan said. "What are you going to do?" He picked up a socket wrench and went back to the Sportster. Work. The first incident happened 11 days later. Ethan arrived at the garage at 5:05 in the morning to find 3 of his storage units broken open. Someone had gone through his parts inventory, not stolen the expensive items. He's just moved things. He's scattered things. He's rearranged what had taken him months to organize. It was the message of it. We were here. We can come back. He spent 2 hours reorganizing before Rosa arrived. He didn't call the sheriff. He knew what the sheriff would say, which was that there was no evidence of who'd done it and nothing technically stolen, which meant no report worth filing. He called a locksmith and upgraded the deadbolts. The second incident happened 8 days after that. A customer's truck that was in for a full engine rebuild had its fuel line cut clean through. The customer, a farmer named Dale Whitmore, who'd been bringing vehicles to Ethan for 3 years, discovered it when he came to pick up the truck, and Ethan explained what had happened. Dale went pale, not because of the truck, because of the implication. Someone's sending you a message through my property, Dale said. Yes, Ethan said. What are you going to do? Fix your fuel line at no charge, Ethan said. And keep working. Dale shook his head slowly. He looked like a man watching a flood start at the edge of his field. Ethan, this kind of thing doesn't stop at cut fuel lines. I know. Then why won't you? Because if I give him an inch, Ethan said quietly, the next business in this town that he targets doesn't have anyone left who stood up first. He handed Dale his keys. Truck will be ready Thursday. The third incident wasn't subtle. Victor Kane walked into the garage on a Saturday morning when the shop had 4 customers wait, 2 vehicles on the lifts, and Rosa managing a call at the front desk. He walked in with 3 men and didn't acknowledge the customers at all. He found Ethan in the first bay and put his hand flat on the hood of the car Ethan was working on. Last offer, Victor said, loud enough that everyone heard. Twice market value for the property, cash, 30 days to vacate. Ethan looked at the hand on the car, looked up at Victor. Remove your hand from the customer's vehicle. Did you hear me? Twice market. I heard you. Ethan set down the tool he was holding. Remove your hand from the customer's vehicle. There was a moment of absolute silence in the garage. Even the radio that Rosa played constantly had been turned down. Everyone was watching. Victor lifted his hand, slowly. He's deliberate. You have 48 hours, Victor said. After that, I stopped being patient. He walked out. One of the waiting customers, an older man named Harold Briggs, who'd been getting his pickup serviced at Walker's for as long as Ethan had owned the place, walked up to Ethan and spoke quietly. Son, I know a few people on the county board. I could make some calls. I appreciate that, Harold. But this is my problem to handle. Ethan picked up his tool. I'll handle it. Harold didn't look convinced. None of them did. But they stayed, all 4 customers. Every single one of them waited for their vehicles and paid in full when they left, which wasn't always the case on a slow Saturday. It was a small act of solidarity. The kind that doesn't make the news but means everything to the person receiving it. Ethan stood alone in the garage that evening after everyone had gone. He sat on a stool beside the Sportster and put one hand on the tank. The metal was cool under his palm. I'm not moving, he said to the empty garage, to his father's machine, to whatever version of his father might still be listening. I'm not moving. He didn't call anyone that night. He should have. But Ethan Walker was built from the same material as his father, stubborn in the way of people who've learned that asking for help feels like failing, even when everyone who loves them would say otherwise. What he didn't know was that someone else had already made a call. Rosa had watched everything, every incident, every confrontation, every moment where Ethan had stood firm and paid a price for it. And Rosa, who said she wasn't sentimental and proved it regularly, had opened a drawer in the back office and found an old card that Ethan kept without ever explaining. The card had a phone number on it, nothing else. She'd found it years ago when reorganizing the office and asked Ethan about it. He'd taken the card from her, looked at it for a moment, and put it back. Emergency only was all he'd said. Rosa looked at Ethan's cracked ribs. In her mind's eye, he'd mentioned them offhand that morning. Said he'd hurt himself moving equipment. But she'd seen the way he was breathing, and she looked at Dale Whitmore's cut fuel line, and the ransacked storage units, and Victor Kane's hand on a customer's hood, and she made a decision. She took a photograph of the card on her phone before she put it back. She didn't tell Ethan. She waited. Victor Kane's patience lasted exactly 31 hours past his deadline. Not 48, 31, because patience had never been his actual currency. Patience was just the story he'd told himself between acts of force. He arrived on a Wednesday evening when Ethan was working late. Just him and Rosa closing up, 3 vehicles, 8 men this time. They came in fast. There was no negotiation, no speech, no last offer. Victor simply walked to the first toolbox he saw and put his boot through it. His men spread out through the garage. Tools came off the walls. Parts bins got overturned. A hydraulic line was cut on the working lift, which dropped a vehicle onto its stands with a crash that made the whole building shudder. Rosa came out of the office screaming for them to stop, and one of Victor's men caught her arm and held her back. Ethan moved toward her, and that's when 2 of them grabbed him. He didn't go down easy. That was important to understand about Ethan Walker. He wasn't a fighter in the way Victor's men were fighters. He didn't have their training or their weight or their pure comfort with violence. But he had something they underestimated, which was the controlled fury of a man who has been patient long past what patience deserved and who has run out. He broke one man's grip and put him into the workbench with enough force to scatter tools across the floor. He caught another with an elbow that connected hard enough that the man sat down hard and stayed there for a moment. But there were too many of them. They put him on the ground. And then Victor Kane did what men like Victor Kane always do. When they finally have someone on the ground, he made sure the lesson was physical. He made sure it would be felt for weeks. The ribs cracked on the third kick. Ethan heard it before he felt it. Then he felt it. He didn't make a sound. That was the thing that seemed to disturb Victor's men more than anything else. He made no sound. He lay on the oil-stained concrete of his father's garage floor, and he breathed through the pain in short, controlled intervals, and he did not give them the sound they wanted. Victor crouched down beside him. "Now you understand your situation," Victor said. "This is what not accepting a reasonable offer looks like." He stood and looked around the garage. His eyes landed on the Sportster hanging from the chain mount. "What is that?" "Don't," Ethan said. His voice was raw. "Controlled. Don't what?" "Touch that bike." Victor walked toward it. "That was my father's," Ethan said. The words cost him something. The way they came out, rough and stripped down. "That is the only thing in this building that I'm asking you to leave alone." Victor put his hand on the chrome fender, the one Ethan had sourced from Tucson, the one that had cost him 3 months of careful savings. He looked back at Ethan on the floor and he pulled. The fender came off with a sound like something tearing that wasn't metal. He dropped it on the concrete. His men moved through the garage like a tide. When they were done, the Sportster was barely recognizable. 3 years of careful restoration scattered across an oil-stained floor. Ethan lay still. Victor stood over him for a moment. "When you're ready to talk business," Victor said, "you know how to reach me." He left. Rosa was across the garage, her hands shaking. She went to Ethan the moment they were gone. She knelt beside him, and he reached up and gripped her wrist, not for help getting up yet, but to tell her without words that he was still there. "He's still present. I'm calling an ambulance," she said. "He's in a minute," he said. She looked at the Sportster, at the fender on the floor, at the photograph still taped above the workbench, the only thing in the garage nobody had touched. "He's in a minute," Ethan said again. He closed his eyes. "He's in a minute." Rosa took out her phone. She didn't call an ambulance first. She called the number she'd photographed from the card in the drawer. It rang twice. A voice answered. Rough and low, the kind of voice that had been through things. "Yeah, my name is Rosa Delgado," she said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of that. "I work for Ethan Walker in Silver Creek, Arizona." His father was James Walker. A pause. "I know who James Walker was," the voice said. "Then you should know what just happened to his son." She told him. "All of it." The property demands. The broken tools. The cut fuel lines. The customers who'd been implicated. And finally her voice catching for just a moment, and then steadying the cracked ribs. The destroyed Sportster. The man lying on the floor of his father's garage, unwilling to make a sound. When she finished, there was a silence on the other end of the line. Then the voice said 3 words, "We're coming down." Rosa pressed the phone against her chest and looked down at Ethan. He'd gotten himself to sitting position against the workbench, one arm crossed carefully over his ribs, his face the color of ash. "Whose did you call?" he said. She hesitated. "Rosa." His voice was quiet. "He's not angry, just tired and honest. Who did you call?" "The number on the card in the back drawer," she said. Ethan was quiet for a long time. He looked at the photograph on the wall. His father's hand raised. That motorcycle that was now in pieces around them. He looked at the fender on the floor. "Okay," he said finally. Just that. Okay. But Rosa heard something in that word that she'd never heard from him before. Something that wasn't defeat and wasn't anger. Something older than both of those things. It sounded like relief, like a man who had finally stopped carrying something alone. She called the ambulance. Ethan sat against the workbench of his father's garage and breathed through cracked ribs in the short ease. Controlled intervals of someone who has learned to manage pain. Ease. And he looked at the scattered pieces of the Sportster. Ease. And he did not cry. But when the ambulance lights finally swept through the garage windows, that red and white pulse across the concrete and the tools and the photograph on the wall, Ethan Walker closed his eyes and pressed his forehead back against the workbench, and he said something very quietly. Too quietly for Rosa to hear, but the garage heard it. And somewhere out in the dark desert, 140 sets of engines were already starting. The hospital in Silver Creek was small enough that the night nurse knew most of the patients by name before they even checked in. Ethan Walker was not a stranger to her. She'd treated his hands twice for deep lacerations from shop work, once for a burn that ran up his left forearm from a bad weld. She'd never seen him come in the way he came in that Wednesday night, Rosa beside him. His arm braced across his own chest, his face the color of old concrete, and his jaw set in that particular way that meant he would not be answering questions about how it happened. The x-rays confirmed 2 cracked ribs on the left side and 1 fracture on the right. The doctor, a tired man named Greer, who'd been practicing in rural Arizona for 20 years, pressed Ethan's side carefully and watched his patient's face go white and still. "Someone put boots to you," Greer said. "Not a question." "It's an equipment accident," Ethan said. Greer looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Rosa, who was standing in the corner of the exam room with her arms crossed and her eyes doing the talking that her mouth wasn't. "It's an equipment accident," Greer said again, slowly. "Yes, sir." Greer wrote the prescription, wrapped the ribs, gave Ethan a list of instructions he already knew Ethan wasn't going to follow, and then stopped at the curtain before he left. "You know I'm required to document blunt force trauma inconsistent with the stated cause." "Document what you need to document," Ethan said. "That's not me threatening you," Greer said. "That's me telling you there's a record now, in case it matters later." "He's understood." Greer left. Rosa waited until the curtain stopped moving. Then she pulled the plastic chair to the side of the exam table and sat down and looked at Ethan with the particular expression she used when she was going to say something she'd already decided to say, regardless of his response. "You need to know that the person I called said they were coming." "I know. You're not angry." "No, you should have called them yourself," she said. "Weeks ago." Ethan adjusted his position on the table, and the pain that crossed his face was sharp and gone in an instant. "I know that too. My father would have done exactly what I did," Ethan said, and then he would have called them. "He's in that order." He looked at the ceiling. Same stubbornness. Same ending. Rosa made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and frustration. She sat back in the chair. "Who are they?" "People who knew my father," Ethan said. "People who don't forget." "Hell's Angels," she said. "He's flat, not a question." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. Outside the curtain, the hospital made its small sounds, a cart rolling down linoleum. A monitor beeping 3 rooms over. A phone ringing at the nurse's station and being answered on the second ring. Normal sounds, the sounds of a world that didn't know yet what was moving through the desert towards Silver Creek. "How many?" Rosa asked. Ethan shook his head slightly. "I don't know. I don't know what Marcus still runs, how many he can call." "He's Marcus," she said. "Marcus Callahan. He and my father went back 30 years. He was the one my dad helped on the highway." Ethan paused. The night Marcus got hit, Dad was the only one who stopped." Rosa had heard pieces of this story, not the whole thing. Ethan didn't tell it often. She waited. "It was winter," Ethan said. "Dad was coming back from a job in Flagstaff. Found Marcus on the side of the road, bike down, bleeding from a head wound bad enough that he shouldn't have been conscious. Dad loaded him into his truck, drove 40 miles to the nearest hospital, stayed there until someone from the club arrived. He turned his head and looked at Rosa. He never asked for anything in return. That wasn't why he did it. But the Brotherhood remembered. They always remembered. And Marcus is the one who answered the phone," Rosa said. That was his voice. I recognized it even after all these years. She started. "I know," Ethan said quietly. She understood what he meant. Whatever had come through in Marcus Callahan's voice when she'd told him what happened to Ethan, it wasn't a business calculation. It wasn't obligation. It was something older and more immediate than either of those things. It was the sound of a man being told that a debt he'd carried with him for 30 years had just become payable. The drive back to the garage took 12 minutes. Neither of them spoke for most of it. When Rosa pulled into the lot, they both sat in the car for a moment and looked at the building. The lights were still on inside. They'd left in too much of a hurry to turn them off. I'm sleeping here tonight, Ethan said. No, you're not. Rosa, you have 2 cracked ribs and a fracture, she said. You're going home, you're sleeping flat, and I'm opening tomorrow. You're not opening alone. Then come in at 10, she said, which is 2 hours after you normally would. Consider it a medical concession. She looked at him. Also, I'm calling Tommy Reeves and asking if he can park in the lot overnight. Tommy Reeves was 63, retired highway patrol, and lived 4 blocks from the garage. He and Ethan played cards on the first Friday of every month. He owned a shotgun and had a reputation in Silver Creek for being the kind of man who could sit absolutely still for very long periods of time and remain entirely alert throughout. Ethan didn't argue. That was how Rosa knew the pain was worse than he was showing. He went home. Rosa called Tommy Reeves, who answered on the first ring. Asked exactly 2 questions: is Ethan alive? And where does Kane's crew typically run from? And then said he'd be in the lot in 15 minutes. She locked up the office and stood alone in the garage for a moment before she left. The pieces of the Sportster were still on the floor. She'd picked up a few of the smaller chrome pieces while waiting for the ambulance, set them carefully on the workbench. The fender, the hand grip that had rolled under the lift, the carburetor cover that had come off and cracked at the edge when it hit the concrete. She picked up photograph from where it had fallen. Someone had knocked it from the wall. After all, she'd missed it before. The frame was cracked, but the photograph was untouched. James Walker's hand raised, his face caught in that particular combination of pride and amusement that Ethan sometimes wore without knowing it. She set the photograph carefully against the base of the workbench, face up. People are coming, she said to the photograph. She wasn't sure why she said it. She was not a sentimental person, but it felt like the right thing to say. She left. Tommy Reeves was already in the lot. Victor Kane found out about the hospital visit before morning. He had a source inside the small county records system, a clerk who passed information for cash, nothing dramatic, just the small, regular corruption that functions invisibly in understaffed counties. By 6 in the morning, he knew Ethan had been treated for rib fractures. By 8, he'd confirmed through a separate channel that no police report had been filed. He told himself this meant Ethan was afraid. He poured coffee in the kitchen of the house he was renting on the north end of Silver Creek and told himself he'd won. The mechanic was hurt, isolated, and still hadn't gone to law enforcement. Which meant he had no real allies. Which meant all Ethan needed was one more push, maybe not even physical this time. Maybe just a legal approach. A code violation complaint to the county. Something that would put the garage under regulatory pressure while Ethan was too injured to fight it. Victor was already composing the plan in his head when his phone rang. The man on the other end was someone he used for information across multiple counties. He's a reliable source, not prone to drama. I need you to hear something, the source said. No preamble. I'm listening. There's movement on I-17 south of Flagstaff. Multiple units. The source's voice had a quality Victor didn't immediately recognize. It took him a moment. The quality was controlled fear. We're talking a lot of bikes, Victor, coming out of the high country. I've got a contact at a truck stop who says they've been rolling through since about 3 this morning. Victor set down his coffee. What kind of movement? Hell's Angels kind. Victor was quiet. My contact counted 40 before he stopped counting, the source said. He said they kept coming. 40 motorcycles doesn't mean anything. They do runs all the time. 40 was what he counted in the first 20 minutes, the source said. And they're not running random, Victor. They're moving south and east. They're moving towards Silver Creek. Victor put the phone down without hanging up. He stood in his kitchen and thought about Ethan Walker lying on the garage floor. And he thought about the look on Ethan's face when Victor had touched that motorcycle. And he tried to remember what Ethan had said. Something about the bike belonging to his father, a biker. Victor had registered that and dismissed it. He picked the phone back up. You're telling me the mechanic is connected to Hell's Angels. I'm telling you 40 motorcycles that I can confirm our Hell's Angels patches came through a single truck stop between 3 and 4 in the morning, the source said, and they're pointed at your position. What you do with that is your business. The call ended. Victor Kane stood in his kitchen and did something he almost never did. He thought carefully. He ran the arithmetic. He had 8 men, capable men. but men whose capability was built on confronting people who couldn't fight back. Shopkeepers, debtors, small business owners who had no network and no history that connected them to anything organized. He's 40 bikes, moving since 3 in the morning. If it was 40, it could be more. He called his second, a man named Darren, who'd been with him for 6 years. Get everyone together, Victor said. I need to know what we're dealing with. What happened? The mechanic has friends, Victor said. Bigger friends than I accounted for. How much bigger? Victor didn't answer that directly. Get everyone together, he said again. Please do it now. Ethan knew something was happening before anyone told him. He woke at dawn with his ribs sending sharp protests through his left side every time he breathed too deeply, and he lay in the stillness of his house and he listened. Not for anything specific, just the way his father had taught him to listen with his whole body, not just his ears. James Walker had said that the desert always tells you what's coming if you're quiet enough to hear it. What Ethan heard, just past the edge of normal morning silence, was a vibration. It's low, rhythmic, the kind that you feel in your sternum before your ears pick it up as actual sound. He sat up carefully, one hand braced on the mattress, and he held his breath, and he listened. He's there, distant but steady, a sound like rolling weather. He reached for his phone. A text from Rosa sent 20 minutes ago. Tommy said to tell you the horizon's moving. These his words. Ethan read that twice. He stood up, dressed slowly, each movement measured against the pull of damaged ribs. He's pulled on his boots. He's took the pain medication the hospital had given him, which he'd intended to avoid, and reconsidered, and took it anyway. He was going to need to be functional. He drove to the garage. Tommy Reeves was leaning against the hood of his truck in the lot, arms crossed, looking southwest down the highway. He didn't turn when Ethan's truck pulled in. He just said, "You hear that?" "I heard it," Ethan said. He got out carefully. "How long?" "Sound started about 10 minutes ago," Tommy said. "Wind's right, so it carries." He finally looked at Ethan. His eyes went to the careful way Ethan was holding his left side. "You shouldn't be here. This is my garage." "Yeah," Tommy said. He looked back toward the highway. "This is going to be something, son." "How many do you think?" Based on the sound. Tommy tilted his head. His years of highway patrol gave him the ability to read road sounds the way a musician reads music. He was quiet for a moment. "A lot." Ethan looked down the empty highway. Rose's car pulled into the lot. She got out and stood beside them, and the three of them were quiet together, listening to the desert carry a sound toward them that was growing, incrementally and unmistakably, with every passing minute. Then Dale Whitmore's truck turned into the lot. Ethan looked at it. "What's he doing here?" "I might have mentioned something to a few people last night," Rosa said. Rosa. Harold Briggs is behind him," she said. Ethan turned. Harold Briggs's ancient pickup was indeed rolling in off the highway, followed by a sedan he recognized as belonging to Carla Norton, who ran the diner 3 blocks over. Behind Carla was a truck he didn't immediately recognize, and behind that, 2 more vehicles. Within 15 minutes, the parking lot of Walker's garage had 11 vehicles in it, and 14 people standing in the morning air. Some of them Ethan knew well. Some he knew only as faces and names from the small constellation of Silver Creek Commerce and Community, the hardware store owner. The man who ran the feed store. 2 women from the community center. A retired teacher who taught Ethan in the 7th grade and still occasionally brought her son's motorcycle in for service. They stood in his lot, and they didn't say much. Dale Whitmore brought a thermos of coffee and passed it around. Harold Briggs stood with his thumbs in his belt loops and watched the highway. "You didn't need to do this," Ethan said to the group. "You've been doing for us for years," Carla Norton said. She said it matter-of-factly, without sentiment, which made it mean more. This is how it works. The sound from the highway was real now. Not a vibration you felt in your chest, actual sound. The unmistakable accumulated thunder of motorcycle engines in formation. And every person in that lot turned toward the highway at the same moment. Victor Kane's crew had gathered at the house on the north end of town. All 8 of them, plus Victor, sitting around a table with cold coffee and taut nerves, and the sound coming through the walls now like weather. Darren looked at Victor. "How many did your guy say?" He stopped counting at 40. The room was quiet, in a way rooms aren't quiet when they're comfortable. This was the silence of men recalculating. 40 bikers, said one of the men, a young one named Chris, who'd been with Victor for 8 months and had never seen anything that went sideways on him before. That's a lot of bikers. We don't know they're coming here," another man said. Nobody agreed with him. The sound was not ambiguous about direction. Yes. Victor stood up. Everyone stay calm, he said. We don't know what this is. I know what this is, Darren said quietly. He'd been in situations Victor hadn't prior to their arrangement. Ease. He'd run with harder people before he'd settled into Victor's more structured operation. He knew the sound of organized movement. This is a response, Victor. This is what happens when you touch someone without checking their background first. He's a mechanic, Victor said. He's the son of a man who was connected to one of the oldest chapters in the Southwest, Darren said, which we would have known if we'd asked anyone before we went in. Victor turned and looked at him. Darren met his eyes without blinking. I'm not saying I told you. I'm saying someone should have checked. The sound outside had become impossible to dismiss or rationalize. It was the sound of a highway being used by people who knew how to use highways. It was organized and it was large and it was getting closer. Victor's phone rang. He looked at the number and didn't recognize it. He answered it because in that moment not answering felt worse. Mr. Kane. The voice on the other end was the kind of voice that didn't need volume to carry weight. Measured. The voice of someone who had made many decisions and had not regretted most of them. My name is Marcus Callahan. I think you've heard of me by now. Victor said nothing. I'm going to ask you to listen, Marcus said. Because what I tell you in the next 2 minutes will determine how the rest of your day goes. And I think you're smart enough to understand that. Victor sat down. He didn't know he'd done it until he was already sitting. You put boots to a man named Ethan Walker 2 nights ago, Marcus said. You broke his ribs. You destroyed a motorcycle that was the last piece of his father. And his father, Marcus, stopped for just a moment. Just a half second. But Victor heard it. His father was a man named James Walker. 23 years ago, James Walker found me bleeding on a highway in the middle of a snowstorm. He put me in his truck. He drove me 40 miles. He sat in a hospital chair all night until my people came. He never asked what I owed him. He never asked for anything. The sounds outside the house was very loud now. James Walker died 6 years ago, Marcus said. And his son has been carrying that garage and that man's memory for 6 years on his own. And what you did to that garage and to that man 2 nights ago. Another pause. That's not something I'm able to let stand. I want you to understand that this is not a negotiation and it is not a threat. It is a statement of fact. Are you listening? I'm listening, Victor said. His voice came out smaller than he intended. Good, Marcus said. Then here's what's going to happen. Ethan heard the engines before he could see anything. He was standing in the lot with Rosa on his left and Tommy Reeves on his right and 14 Silver Creek residents behind him. And the sound was everywhere now. He's in the air and in the ground and in his chest. And he stood with his arms slightly away from his sides because the ribs made crossing them impossible. And he breathed carefully and he watched the highway. The first bike appeared through the desert heat shimmer at the edge of vision. Then 3 more, then 10. Then the highway was full of them. They came in formation, not chaotic, not a pack, but organized the way only people with long practice move together. 2 abreast in places, the column stretching back along the highway farther than Ethan could track in the morning light. Black leather, chrome catching the Arizona sun, patches he recognized from the old photographs in his father's things, from the stories James Walker had told him. When Ethan was young enough to sit at his father's knee and believe that the world operated according to clear and comprehensible codes of loyalty. They filled the highway. Rosa put her hand on Ethan's arm and left it there. He counted without intending to count and lost track somewhere past 60. The line of bikes was still coming when the front of the formation slowed and turned and began pulling into the lot with the kind of practiced ease that came from doing this in 100 places across 30 years of road. They parked. Engine by engine, the sound fell away, until the last one went quiet, and Silver Creek was the most silent it had been since before dawn. And in that silence, a man dismounted from a road king at the front of the formation and walked across the lot. He was in his mid-60s. He's built broad and solid, with a gray beard and a face that carried its history plainly not battered, but weathered in the way of someone who had been through things and had not tried to hide from the fact of having been through them. He wore the patch of the Hells Angels on his vest. He wore the rocker of his chapter. He wore the rank of a man who had earned every piece of it. He walked directly to Ethan. He stopped 3 feet away and looked at him at his face, which Ethan knew still showed the marks from the garage floor. At the careful way Ethan held his left side. at the grease that was back on his hands already, because Ethan had been at the workbench at 5 this morning, because standing still was worse than moving. Marcus Callahan's face did something complex and human. Ethan had been prepared for a lot of things in this moment. He had not been entirely prepared for the look on Marcus's face, which was grief and anger, and something that looked remarkably like guilt. The guilt of a man who has been carrying a debt for a long time and is arriving to find that the interest has accumulated. "Your father," Marcus said. His voice was different in person than on the phone. "Fuller. He would have called me before it got to this." "Yes," Ethan said, "he would have." Marcus looked at him steadily. "You're more stubborn than he was. He used to say the same thing," Ethan said. Something shifted in Marcus's face. He reached out and put a hand on Ethan's shoulder, the right one, carefully, not the side with the damaged ribs, and he squeezed once. It was the kind of gesture that means 10 different things simultaneously and requires no translation. "We're going to fix this," Marcus said. Behind him, 140 riders had dismounted and were standing in the Silver Creek morning with the particular stillness of people who have arrived somewhere with clear purpose and are waiting for the next moment to make that purpose known. "I know," Ethan said. Marcus released his shoulder and turned to look at the garage. He looked at it for a long moment, at the hand-painted sign, at the cracked bay window that nobody had gotten around to replacing yet. At the visible disorder through the open bay doors where the destruction of 2 nights ago was still half cleaned, half reassembled. "Your father talked about this place," Marcus said. "Every time I saw him, he talked about the garage." He turned back to Ethan. "He was proud of you. I want you to know that. He told me that himself." Ethan said nothing for a moment. He looked at the lot full of riders. At Rosa beside him, her chin up, not showing what that sentence had done to her on Ethan's behalf. At Dale Whitmore and Harold Briggs and the 14 Silver Creek residents who had shown up this morning to stand in a parking lot because they believed it was where they needed to be. He looked at the garage, his father's garage. "Victor Kane," Ethan said. His voice was steady. "He's on the north end of town. He's renting a house. His crew is there." "I know where he is," Marcus said. "What are you going to do?" Marcus looked at him. His expression was clear and unhurried. "What's right," he said simply. "That's all. What's right?" He turned back to the formation behind him. He didn't need to raise his voice. The silence of the lot was total enough that every word carried. "We're here," he said, "because a man named James Walker stopped for one of ours on a highway in the middle of winter and asked nothing in return. And because his son built something honest and worked hard and refused to be broken by a man who confuses fear with respect." He paused. "We don't break what's already standing. We hold it up. That's what we're here to do." Not a word from the formation behind him. Just the steady presence of 140 people who had ridden through the Arizona night to be in this lot on this morning. Ethan put one hand on the garage doorframe beside him. The pain in his ribs was real and constant, and he was not going to let it show. He looked at Marcus. "Then let's get to work," Ethan said. And Victor Kane, 11 blocks away in the house on the north end of Silver Creek, was still holding his phone and listening to the silence where Marcus Callahan's voice had been. And he was beginning to understand with the particular cold clarity that comes only when consequences become fully real that the man he'd put on the floor of that garage had never been what Victor thought he was, and that the loyalty of people who remembered was about to show him exactly what that miscalculation had cost him. Marcus made 2 calls before anyone moved. The first call was to a man named Teller, who handled the Brotherhood's legal contacts across the Southwest. The second call was to Sheriff Ray DuPont of Silver Creek, whom Marcus had already spoken with twice since 3 in the morning. Ethan overheard enough of the second call to understand that Sheriff DuPont was not being warned. He was being informed. There was a difference, and Marcus understood it precisely. A warning implied that something illegal was about to occur, and that the recipient had a choice to intervene. An informing meant that what was happening was going to happen within full view of the law, and that the law was welcome to observe. DuPont, from what Ethan gathered, had asked exactly one question. Marcus had said, "Nobody gets hurt who doesn't make that choice themselves." There had been a pause on DuPont's end, and then the call had ended. Rosa was beside Ethan when he finished processing what he'd heard. "The sheriff knows," she said quietly. Marcus told him. Ethan said, "And in nothing," he told him. Ethan watched Marcus pocket the phone and turn back toward the formation. That's Marcus telling the law that he's not hiding. That's how he operates. Is that smart? Ethan thought about it for a moment. It's honest, he said. In my experience, honest and smart end up being the same thing more often than not. Rosa looked at the formation behind Marcus, the riders still standing beside their bikes. Not moving. Not restless. Just present in the way of people who have done this before and know that patience is part of the work. What happens now? Now they go see Victor, Ethan said. And you? I stay here. He said it before she could ask him not to go, because he already knew she was going to ask, and because he'd already had the argument with himself and come to the same answer. The garage needed someone in it, someone who represented what this was actually about, which was not force but continuance, the simple stubborn fact of a business that was going to keep being a business. Rosa studied his face. You actually believe that? That staying here is the right move. My father didn't teach me to go looking for fights, Ethan said. He taught me to hold my ground. There's a difference. He looked at the garage door. Marcus knows what he's doing. This is his work, not mine. Marcus came back over. He had two of his riders with him, a man in his 50s named Dutch, who had the quality of someone who'd been large his entire life and had never had to prove it, and a younger woman named Sarah, who wore a prospect patch and moved with the precise economy of someone who'd earned her presence in this formation through things nobody needed to advertise. We're moving to the north end, Marcus said. I want someone here with you. I don't need Ethan. Marcus's voice was not hard. It was simply final, the way certain statements are final, not because they're commands, but because they're true. I know you don't need it. That's not what this is. He looked at the garage. Your father's shop deserves witnesses while the rest of this happens. People here who stand for it while we take care of what needs taking care of. Ethan was quiet. 20 riders stay, Marcus said. They'll work. If there's anything that needs hands, they've got hands. He looked at the damaged bay, the half-reassembled workspace, the tools still not fully returned to their proper order. James would have said the same thing. Ethan let out a slow breath. All right, Marcus nodded once. He turned to the formation. He didn't yell, didn't use a radio. He simply made a gesture, subtle, practiced, and the formation began to move. Not all of it. 20 riders peeled away and came to stand near the garage entrance. The rest mounted. One after another, engines caught, and the column began to reassemble itself on the highway. Marcus looked at Ethan one more time. I'll call you when it's done. Marcus. Ethan stopped him. He had something to say, and he was searching for how to say it without it coming out wrong. Don't do anything that brings us back on your people. Whatever happens with Victor, I don't want what's left of this landing on anyone who came here to help me. Marcus smiled. It was the first time his face had done that, and it changed him completely younger somehow, in that moment. Like the man he might have been before the decades and the road. James used to say things like that, he said. Same exact instinct. Worry about everyone else first. He put a hand briefly on Ethan's shoulder. We've been doing this a long time, son. Trust us. He walked to his bike. He mounted, and he led 120 Hell's Angels north through Silver Creek toward a house where Victor Kane was still sitting with a phone in his hand and a cold calculation dissolving in his chest. Victor had 7 minutes between the end of Marcus's call and the sound of the formation turning onto his street. He used them poorly. The first 2 minutes he spent trying to reach a contact in Phoenix who theoretically provides some kind of intervention or buffer. The contact didn't answer. The second 2 minutes he spent telling his men that this was manageable, that the Brotherhood wasn't stupid enough to do anything overtly illegal, that this was theater and they needed to hold their nerve. Darren listened to this without expression, which was worse than arguing. The remaining 3 minutes, Victor spent walking to the window and looking out at the street and watching the first of the motorcycles come around the corner. It was not theater. Chris, the youngest of Victor's men, actually took a step backward when the column filled the street. He didn't mean to. His body did it before his brain had a say. Hold your positions, Victor said. His voice had the quality of a man telling himself something rather than the people around him. Victor, Darren said. Hold, Victor. Darren's voice was the opposite of Victor's low and grounded, the voice of a man who has given up the pretense of managing what cannot be managed. Look at the street. Victor looked at the street. The bikes had stopped. The riders had dismounted. They were standing on both sides of the street, lining it the way a military honor guard lines a route, except there was nothing honorable about being on the receiving end of it. They were standing with the stillness of people who had nothing to prove and knew it, And that stillness was the most frightening thing Victor Kane had encountered in 20 years of operating the way he operated. Because he understood threat. He understood aggression. He understood men who wanted to fight because he'd used men like that his entire career. What he did not understand and could not calculate was men who didn't need to demonstrate anything. Men who were simply there, fully and undeniably there, because they had decided to be. Ease. Marcus Callahan walked up the path to the house alone. He knocked on the door. Victor stood inside for 5 full seconds before he opened it. When he did, Marcus looked at him without any particular expression. Just looked at him, at his face, his hands, the set of his shoulders, the way a man looks at a situation he's already assessed and filed. You want to do this inside or out here? Marcus said. Victor looked past him at the street, inside. Marcus stepped into the front room. He looked around once, not searching, just noting, and then he looked back at Victor. Where are your people? Kitchen, Victor said. They stay there. Victor turned toward the kitchen doorway and made a gesture. Nobody appeared, which meant Darren had already communicated the same thing from within. Marcus sat down in the nearest chair without being invited. He put his hands on his knees, and he looked at Victor Kane with the patience of someone who has driven through the night to have a conversation and intends to have it completely. Tell me about Ethan Walker, Marcus said. Victor blinked. I what? Tell me about him. What you saw when you looked at him. This was not what Victor had expected. He'd expected demands. Ultimatums. The vocabulary of force he understood because he used it himself. He had not expected to be asked a question. He sat down slowly on the couch across from Marcus. I saw a small business owner who was sitting on valuable property. And a man who thought his principles were more important than his situation. His principles, Marcus said, like he was tasting the word. He could have walked away with twice what that property was worth, Victor said. The habit of justification was deep in him, deeper than strategy. He chose the hard road. He chose his father's road, Marcus said, which is different. He leaned forward slightly. You know what James Walker was? Before the garage, before Silver Creek, he was a man who ran with us for 15 years, not because he needed the protection or the reputation, because he believed in what it meant to stand for the people beside you. When he left the road and bought that garage, everyone thought he was walking away. Marcus shook his head. He wasn't walking away. He was taking what he'd learned and building something with it. Something for his son. Victor said nothing, and his son built on it. With no help from anyone, with no use of his father's name or his father's connections. Marcus's voice remained level. Do you know how many times Ethan Walker could have called us? In 6 years? How many situations where having the Brotherhood's name attached to his garage would have made things easier for him? Apparently didn't, Victor said. Never once, Marcus said. Not until your people put him on the floor of his own garage and destroyed the one thing he was building for his father's memory. He stopped. Please let that sit in the air between them. That's what you did, Mr. Kane. That's the full picture of what you did. Victor's jaw was tight. What do you want? I want you to understand what you owe, Marcus said. Not to me, to him. He stood. You're going to make this right with Ethan Walker. Every tool you broke, every part you damaged, the repairs to his lift, the customer vehicles your people touched. You're going to make all of that right, financially, and completely. And if I don't, this isn't a negotiation, Marcus said. I told you that on the phone. This is me telling you what's going to happen. He put his hands in his pockets and looked at Victor with something that wasn't quite contempt, something more like the particular weariness of a man who has seen too many Victor Kanes in his life and has run out of surprise at what they do. You're also going to leave Silver Creek. Your operation, your people, everything. You're going to find somewhere else to do whatever it is you believe you're doing. You can't make me leave a town, Victor said. No, Marcus agreed. I can't. He tilted his head slightly. But I have people in Phoenix, in Tucson, in Flagstaff, in every city between here and the California border. And every one of them knows your name now. Your operation, the 3 properties you're running vehicles through, and the name of the county clerk you've been paying for records access. He paused. Let that register. I can't make you leave, but I can make it very difficult for you to operate. In this state, or the ones adjacent. Victor stared at him. That clerk's name, Marcus said quietly. You want to know how we got it? Your second man, Darren. He reached out to someone he used to know before he came to work for you. That someone reached out to us. He watched Victor's face process this. Darren's been uncomfortable with this situation from the beginning. I think you already knew that. Victor turned toward the kitchen doorway. He's still in there, Marcus said. I'm not here to burn your people to the ground. I'm telling you about Darren so you understand how clearly we see your position. He moved toward the front door. I'm going back to the garage. I'm going to be there while my people and the people of this town help Ethan Walker put his shop back together. And while that's happening, I'd like you to be making phone calls to your financial people to arrange what you owe him. He opened the door. Fair number is $40,000. For parts, equipment, the lift repair, the customer vehicles, and the Sportster. He looked back. The Sportster alone is worth 20, but we're being reasonable. He left. The door closed. Victor Kane sat in the front room of his rented house and listened to the sound of 120 motorcycle engines starting on his street. And he sat with the weight of a calculation he'd made badly and its full consequences, and he said nothing for a very long time. Darren appeared in the kitchen doorway. Victor looked at him. I should have. Darren started. Don't, Victor said. His voice was flat. Just don't. Darren went back to the kitchen. Victor sat alone and thought about a mechanic on a garage floor who hadn't made a sound. Back at Walker's garage, the 20 riders who'd stayed had not been idle. It started quietly. 2 of the older men had gone to the tools without asking, picking up what was on the floor and identifying what was broken versus what was simply displaced. A third had walked the lift, crouching to examine the cut hydraulic line with the focused attention of someone who knew machinery. He came out from under it and said to no one in particular, "Need a hydraulic line kit in about 2 hours." One of the others was already on a phone. Rosa watched this and felt something happen in her chest that she didn't have an immediate name for. It was the feeling of watching people who were good at caring for things not demonstratively, not with performance, but with the quiet competence of people who understood that some situations called for hands, not words. Dale Whitmore had gotten out of his truck and was helping sort tool inventory against Ethan's mental catalog, Ethan standing at the workbench naming what went where, Dale moving pieces into position. Harold Briggs had called someone at the hardware store, and that someone arrived 20 minutes later with 2 boxes of supplies that nobody had explicitly requested, but that turned out to be exactly what was needed. Ethan moved through it carefully, his ribs making every reach and lift into a negotiation. He refused to sit. He refused to direct from a distance. He put his hands on what needed hands and let the pain be what it was, because sitting still in the middle of all this felt like the one thing he absolutely could not do. Carla Norton from the diner appeared with food at 9 in the morning, not coffee and pastries, but a full setup, real food, because she understood that people working needed eating, and she did what she knew how to do. She set it on the tailgate of Dale's truck and said nothing about it, just started handling the setup, and within minutes, people were cycling through and cycling back to work. Sarah, the prospect who'd stayed with the 20, was working on the Sportster. Ethan noticed this and went to where she was crouched over the scattered pieces. She'd organized them without being asked, grouped by assembly, laid out in the order they'd need to go back on, the chrome pieces separated from the mechanical components. She was examining the cracked carburetor cover with focused attention. You know this bike? Ethan said. I know Sportsters, she said. She didn't look up. 72? Yes. Shovelhead engine? Ironhead, Ethan said. My father found the engine at an estate sale in New Mexico. It took him 3 years to source. Sarah looked up at that. She had sharp eyes and a face that didn't give much away, but something moved through her expression when she processed what he just said. He sourced an Ironhead and rebuilt it twice, Ethan said. She was quiet for a moment. The fender's fixable. The chrome's scratched, but the metal's not bent. She set the carburetor cover carefully to one side. This is going to need a replacement. Do you have a supplier? Tucson. Same dealer who sold me the fenders. Call him today, she said. Tell him you need it rush. If he gives you trouble, have him call Dutch. She went back to the assembly she was organizing. Dutch has a relationship with most parts dealers in the Southwest. He'll smooth it out. Ethan looked at her for a moment, at the careful way her hands moved over his father's pieces. You've been doing this long? Restoring bikes? Since I was 15, she said. My grandfather's shop in Nevada. She paused. He taught me the same way your father taught you, sounds like. With his hands, and by making you watch until you understood why, before he let you touch anything. Yeah, Ethan said, exactly like that. She nodded once and went back to work. Ethan stood there for a moment longer than he needed to. The sun was fully up now and the garage was warm and filled with the sounds of work tools. Movement, voices in low conversation, the specific rhythms of people who know what they're doing. He looked at the photograph above the workbench. Someone had straightened it. Rehung it on its nail. James Walker's hand raised. His face caught mid-law. Ethan turned away before the thing rising in his chest could finish rising. He went back to work. Marcus returned to the garage at 11:15. He came in and went directly to Ethan, who was with Dutch examining the lift mechanism. Dutch gave Marcus one look, and then found somewhere else to be, which Ethan appreciated more than he could say. Done, Ethan said. Done, Marcus said. What does that mean exactly? It means your money will be in an account. Rosa provides details for by end of business Friday, Marcus said. 40,000. It means Kane's crew vacates the North End property today, and they're out of Silver Creek by weekend. It means his operation in this corridor, the vehicle transfers, the county clerk arrangement is finished. He looked at Ethan steadily. His people aren't going to law enforcement because they can't without implicating themselves. Kane knows that, and he knows we know everything, which limits what he can do going forward. The clerk, Ethan said. The county records clerk he was paying. Anonymous tip to the county assessor's office, Marcus said. Already sent. There'll be an internal review. What comes of it is out of our hands, but the information's where it needs to be. Ethan was quiet for a moment, and Kane himself, he just walks. Marcus looked at him carefully. Want something different? No, Ethan said slowly. No, I don't. He thought about it, the genuine question of whether he wanted something more punitive, something that felt more like what Victor had done landing on Victor, with equivalent weight. He thought about it honestly. I want him gone. I want the garage back. I want to be able to open next week without looking over my shoulder. That's what you have, Marcus said. Then that's what I want. Nodded, smart and honest. He looked around the garage, the progress that had been made through the morning. The tools back in order. The lift partially reassembled. The Sportster pieces laid out with Sarah's careful organizational logic. Your father was the same way. He never wanted more than what was right. He used to say the problem with revenge is that it makes you responsible for carrying the story forward. Justice ends the story. Revenge continues it. Ethan had never heard that. He turned it over in his mind and recognized it as something his father would have said, recognized it in the architecture of it, the plainness of the logic. He said that many times, Marcus said, usually after something exactly like this. Ethan put a hand on the workbench. Marcus, what happened that night on the highway? The night my father found you. Marcus was quiet for a moment. He sat on the stool beside the Sportster and looked at the photograph above the workbench. I'd been riding alone that night, which I shouldn't have been doing. I'd gotten into a situation earlier in the day with some people we had ongoing business with, and I'd been stupid about my route, about letting people know where I was. He paused. The bike went down on ice. I hit the guardrail and went over it and down a short embankment. I crawled back up to the road, and I knew I wasn't going to be able to stay conscious for long. He was telling it plainly, the way people tell stories that happen to them that they've had time to process fully. It was 11 at night, December. Not a lot of traffic on that stretch. The cars that did pass, they saw me on the shoulder and they kept going. He stopped. My father stopped, Ethan said. Your father stopped, Marcus said. He didn't know who I was. He didn't know the path. He didn't ask any questions about what I was doing out there or what had happened. He just picked me up and put me in his truck and drove. He looked at Ethan. When I came back around in the hospital and one of my people was there, I asked him who'd brought me in. He said a mechanic from Silver Creek. He shook his head. I tried to reach your father afterward. He wouldn't take anything from me. Said he hadn't done anything that deserved reward. Said he'd done what anyone would do. He looked at his hands. But that's the thing. It's not what anyone would do. It's what very few people would do. And your father was one of them. The garage was quiet around them. The work had continued, but some of the nearest people had gone still without appearing to. In the way people go still when they sense something being said that deserves that stillness. He never told me the full story, Ethan said. No, Marcus said. He wouldn't have. That was him. He just said he'd helped someone once, Ethan said. A writer. And that the brotherhood was made up of people who kept their word and that if I ever had real trouble, the kind that was bigger than one man, there was a number. He made me memorize it. He paused. I kept the card too. In the office drawer. Rosa found it, Marcus said. Rosa found it, Ethan agreed. He looked at Marcus. I should have called. You called when you needed to, Marcus said. That's all that matters. Dutch appeared at the edge of the bay. Lift's good, he said to Ethan. Lines were placed. You'll want to run a pressure test before you put weight on it, but it should hold. Thank you, Ethan said. Dutch nodded and went back to whatever he'd been doing. Ethan stood with Marcus in the middle of the garage, and the morning stretched out around them. The work, the people, the desert air coming through the open bay doors, the smell of the shop that had been his entire life. And then Rosa came in fast from the front office, and the look on her face was not alarm, but something adjacent to it, controlled urgency. The expression of a person who has received information and is moving it to where it needs to go. Victor Kane is at the sheriff's office, she said. Both men looked at her. Tommy Reeves just called. His scanner picked it up. Kane walked in voluntarily about 15 minutes ago. He's making a statement. She looked between Ethan and Marcus. His statement apparently includes information about 3 other operations he's been running in the county, including a name in the county assessor's office, a different name than the clerk. Someone higher up. Ethan absorbed this. Marcus's expression didn't change. He's buying himself coverage, he said, giving them something to work with so they have a reason to treat him as cooperative rather than criminal. Is that bad? Rosa said. It means he's not going to fight, Marcus said. It means he's cutting his losses and trying to manage the fall. He looked at Ethan. He's going to cooperate with law enforcement. Give them the bigger fish, which means he walks lighter than he should. But he walks away from Silver Creek, Ethan said. Yes, Ethan thought about Victor in the sheriff's office. Victor performing cooperation. Victor being Victor, even at the moment of consequences, finding the angle, working the situation, surviving through the same instincts that had made him dangerous. He felt something that wasn't satisfaction, but wasn't quite dissatisfaction either. Just the complicated weight of reality, which is that people like Victor don't usually get exactly what they deserve. They get close, they get enough. It's enough, Ethan said. Marcus looked at him. It's enough, Ethan said again. More certainly, he's gone. The garage is standing. His people are out. He looked at the Sportster pieces laid out on Sarah's careful arrangement. And that bike is going to run again. At that exact moment, Rosa's phone rang. She answered it, listened for 10 seconds, and looked up with an expression nobody in the room had seen from her before. It was unguarded, open, the face she wore when something cut through the composure she worked so hard to maintain. Ethan said, "That was Tommy again," she said. Kane's statement, the higher name at the assessor's office. She paused. It's the deputy assessor, who has been running a side operation on property valuations in this corridor for 4 years, which is why Victor was so confident he could push small businesses off their properties without regulatory challenge. She stopped. She was looking at Ethan now with something that needed a moment before she could say it. Ethan, that deputy assessor is the reason 3 other businesses in this county got pushed out in the last 2 years. The hardware store in Millfield, the family that ran the orchard stand on Route 9. She stopped again. The Reyes family, you remember them? Ethan went very still. The Fraze family had run a roadside supply stop 4 miles west of Silver Creek. They'd closed 18 months ago. Ethan had fixed both their vehicles at no charge in the last year they were operating. Had known them as decent people who'd worked hard and been squeezed out by what everyone assumed was just the economy. Just the market. Just the way things went. They were pushed out, Ethan said. By manufactured code violations, Rosa said. On a property that had no actual violations, manufactured by the deputy assessor's office. Her voice was steady, but her eyes weren't. Victor is giving all of it up. Everything. And the deputy assessor is getting arrested this afternoon. The garage was completely silent. Then Dale Whitmore, who had been standing near the workbench and had clearly heard everything, said quietly, Good Lord. And Harold Briggs beside him said nothing at all. He just took off his hat and held it in his hands, which was Harold's way of marking a moment that deserved marking. Ethan looked at Marcus. Marcus was watching him with an expression that was calm and knowing and fully present the expression of a man who has seen enough of the world to understand that justice, when it moves, often moves with more reach than the original injury suggested. You didn't just defend your garage, Marcus said quietly. You cracked this thing open. Everything that fell out of it, that's not because you were trying to do something large. It's because you refused to do something small. Ethan stood in the middle of his father's garage with cracked ribs and grease on his hands, and the Sportster in pieces around him, and the photograph of James Walker above the workbench, and he felt the full weight of all of it, not the victory of it, but the actual human weight. He's the Reyes family, the hardware store in Millfield. The other people who'd had their properties pulled out from under them by a corruption they never saw clearly enough to fight. All of that, sitting under the same stone that had been sitting on his chest since Victor Kane first walked through his bay doors. He put his hand on the workbench. He pressed his palm flat on the cool surface and breathed carefully through his ribs and let himself feel the full size of what had just shifted. I need to call the Reyes family, he said. Rosa was already looking up the number. Marcus Callahan stood quietly in Walker's garage and watched the son of James Walker handle the weight of a morning that had just become much larger than anyone had planned for. And he felt in the way of a man who has spent decades measuring people against what they actually do when things get hard, that James had known exactly who his son was. And that James had been right about him, completely and entirely right. Rosa found the Reyes family number in 4 minutes. She didn't hand the phone to Ethan. She dialed it and held it out to him, and he took it, and he stood beside the workbench with his palm still pressed flat on the surface, and he waited through 2 rings. A woman answered. Her voice was cautious in the way that people who've been through difficult things become cautious about unknown numbers. Hello, Mrs. Reyes, Ethan said. This is Ethan Walker. I run the garage in Silver Creek. We met a couple of years ago when your husband brought in the supply truck. A pause. I remember you, she said, cautious still but warmer. You fixed it and didn't charge us for the labor. Yes, ma'am. He stopped. He hadn't fully planned what he was going to say, and he knew that was wrong. He should have thought through this, given it the care it deserved. But Rosa had the number, and his hand was already on the phone, and the Reyes family had been waiting 18 months without knowing what had actually happened to them. So he said it plainly. Mrs. Reyes, I need to tell you something that happened this morning. Something you should know about why your property situation went the way it did. There was a silence on the other end that had texture to it, a held breath, the particular silence of someone who has suspected something for a long time and is now standing at the edge of having that suspicion confirmed. Tell me, she said. He told her. All of it that he knew, the deputy assessor, the manufactured violations, the pattern that Victor Kane's statement to the sheriff had exposed. He told her it had been deliberate, targeted, that the violations against the Reyes property had not been real, that someone in a position of authority had created them specifically to pressure the family into vacating. He heard her breathe change on the other end of the line. We knew something was wrong, she said. Her voice was different now, stripped of caution, raw in the way that truth can make a voice raw when it finally arrives. Miguel kept saying the violations didn't make sense, that we'd passed inspection 2 years before with no issues. We hired someone to look at the reports, and he couldn't find the original inspection records. She stopped. We thought we'd lost them somehow in our paperwork. They weren't lost, Ethan said. They were removed. Another silence. Mrs. Reyes, you should contact the county sheriff's office today. Give them your name and your property address and tell them you're a victim of the deputy assessor operation. They're going to have an open file on it within hours. You'll want to be in that file. Can we get the property back? She said. And that was the question that Ethan didn't have an answer for. The property had been sold. It had gone through foreclosure and into new hands, and the legal mechanics of what came next were far beyond his knowledge or Marcus's. I don't know, he said. I honestly don't know. But you should talk to a lawyer who does property law, and you should talk to the sheriff's office today. Both things. Today. Mr. Walker, she said. Her voice was very controlled now, the way voices get when people are working hard to hold something in that wants to come out. Why are you calling us? Why did you? Because I found out this morning, he said simply. And you deserve to know the same day I did. She was quiet for a long moment. Thank you, she said. The words were small, but they were carrying more weight than their size suggested. Thank you for calling. He ended the call and set the phone on the workbench. He stood with his hand on it for a moment. Rosa was watching him. You okay? No, he said, honestly. Not entirely. He picked up a wrench and went back to the lift mechanism because he needed to do something with his hands. Call the hardware store in Millfield too. I want to know if they have the same story. Rosa picked up her phone without a word. Marcus had stepped outside while Ethan was on the call. He stood in the lot and made his own call back to Teller, the legal contact. He spoke for 7 minutes. When he came back in, he went to Dutch first and said something Ethan couldn't hear. Dutch nodded and went to his bike. He mounted and rode out of the lot, alone, heading east. Marcus came to Ethan. Teller's firm does property law as a secondary practice. They're going to reach out to the county sheriff's office voluntarily and offer counsel to any victims of the assessor operation who can't afford representation. He looked at Ethan's face. Pro bono, for the duration of whatever litigation comes out of this. Ethan stopped what he was doing. That's your legal firm? Yes, that's going to cost them. They do pro bono work, Marcus said. This is the kind of case that matters. He met Ethan's eyes directly. Don't argue with me about this. Let it be, Marcus. Let it be, Ethan. Ethan held his gaze for a moment. Then he nodded. He went back to the lift. Dutch is going to the Millfield hardware store, Marcus said. Personally, to explain what happened and to give them Teller's number, and to stand there while the owner makes the call. So the owner knows this is real and not another manipulation. Ethan thought about the hardware store owner. In Millfield, he'd met him once. He's a man named Garrett. He's middle-aged. The store had been his family's for 2 generations. He thought about what it would mean for Garrett to get that information. The relief of it, the anger of it, the complicated grief of knowing that what happened to you was deliberate. That's good, Ethan said. That's the right thing. Marcus sat down on the stool again. He had the quality of a man who could be still without needing to fill the stillness. Ethan had noticed this about him all day, that Marcus didn't generate noise when there was nothing to say. It was a quality Ethan associated with people who were genuinely comfortable with themselves. He's comfortable enough not to need the noise. Can I ask you something? Ethan said. Yes. When you rode in this morning. When you came into the lot. He was looking at the lift, working as he talked. You said you'd driven through the night. How far did you come? Chapter House is outside Flagstaff, Marcus said. He's about 2 hours on a normal run, and the riders. They all came from Flagstaff? Some from Flagstaff, Marcus said. Some from Tucson. 2 came up from Nogales. When the word went out last night, he stopped and reconsidered. When Rosa called me, I made 4 calls. Those 4 people made their own calls. By midnight, we had commitments from 112 riders. By the time we rolled at 3 in the morning, we had 140. Ethan set down his tool. He turned and looked at Marcus. In one night. In one night, Marcus confirmed. Ethan looked at the lot outside. Most of the riders had stayed through the morning. Some had ridden out on errands for parts or supplies. But the lot was still full in a way that Silver Creek's lots were not usually full. They didn't know my father. Most of them didn't, Marcus said. Some of the older riders did, remembered him. But most of them, he paused. When I made the call last night, I told them what happened. I told them a man named James Walker had helped one of our own 30 years ago and never asked for anything back. And I told them that James Walker's son was alone in a town with broken ribs and a destroyed garage, and a man who thought he could operate without consequences. He looked at Ethan. That was enough. That was completely enough. Ethan took a breath. The ribs registered it. People who do right, Marcus said, earn something they usually never see accumulating. Your father did right for 30 years. He helped people. He asked for nothing. He built something honest and passed it to his son. All of that, every single act, it accumulates. It doesn't show on a balance sheet. You can't point to it or count it, but it's real. He gestured at the lot outside. That's what 140 riders looks like. That's what accumulated goodness looks like when it finally has to be visible. Ethan pressed his hand over his ribs and looked at the floor for a long moment. I'm not good at receiving things, he said. I know, Marcus said. Your father wasn't either. Something shifted in his expression, the warmth of an old memory finding its face. He used to say that accepting help was harder than giving it. Said the giving felt natural and the receiving felt like a debt. Yes, Ethan said, exactly like that. The debt goes both ways, Marcus said. That's what he never fully let himself believe. He stood. What you're doing by accepting this, by letting people help, you're doing the same thing he did on that highway. You're giving people the chance to be what they want to be, which is useful, which is good. He looked at Ethan steadily. Don't take that from them. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the photograph, his father's hand raised, caught mid-law. Okay, Ethan said. And the way he said it was different from the way he'd said it the night before, lying on the garage floor with Rosa crouched beside him. The night before it had been the okay of a man who had finally stopped resisting. Today it was something else. The okay of a man who understood what he was saying yes to. Sheriff Ray DuPont arrived at the garage at 1 in the afternoon. He was a lean man in his 50s who'd been sheriff in Silver Creek for 11 years and who wore that tenure in the way of someone who'd made enough hard calls to stop being surprised by complexity. He came alone, no cruiser, personal truck which communicated something before he'd said a word. He found Ethan in the first bay, and he stood in the entrance with his hat in his hand, which was the same gesture Harold Briggs had made earlier, and which Ethan was beginning to recognize as the way men of a certain generation in this part of the country marked gravity. "Please, Ethan," DuPont said. "Sheriff, I owe you an apology." "Please?" Ethan turned fully to face him. He hadn't expected that. "Please," he waited. "The incidents at your garage," DuPont said. "The storage units, the fuel line, the subsequent—" He stopped. "Please, I should have did faster. I had enough probable cause after the second incident to bring Kane in for questioning. Please, I didn't push it the way I should have." His jaw was tight. Partially because I had limited staff, and partially because I didn't understand the full picture of what Kane was operating. He paused. "And partially because I underestimated what he was willing to do." "Please, you documented the trauma," Ethan said. "Greer said you'd have a record." "I have a record," DuPont said. "And I have Kane's full statement from this morning, which he gave voluntarily in exchange for reduced exposure. That statement includes the 2 incidents at your garage, the attack on your person, and the destruction of property." "He's all admitted." He looked at Ethan. "Charges will be filed. Kane will face them. His cooperation on the larger operation doesn't erase what he did to you." "I know," Ethan said. "The deputy assessor was taken into custody at 11:45 this morning," DuPont said. "I suspect you've already heard that." "I heard." DuPont was quiet for a moment, looking around the garage, the progress of the morning's work visible everywhere. The restored order, the riders still present, some of them working, some sitting nearby, the unmistakable sense of a community having collected itself in a place. "I want you to know that what happened here today, the way this came together, that's going to matter beyond Silver Creek. The assessor operation touches 4 counties. There are going to be investigations that run for months." He looked at Ethan. "You didn't just defend your garage. You know that." "Marcus said something similar," Ethan said. "Marcus Callahan," DuPont said. He said the name without edge or agenda, just acknowledgement. He called me at 3 this morning, before they rode. He gave me his full name, his chapter, his cell number, and a list of everything they intended to do and not do." He paused. "In 30 years of law enforcement, I have never received a call like that. That kind of preemptive transparency." He shook his head slightly. "I didn't know what to do with it for about 5 minutes. Then I realized he was giving me the thing that made this possible. He was giving me a reason to stay out of the way and let it work." "Did it?" Ethan said. "Did it work?" DuPont looked at the garage. "At the lot full of riders. At the 14 Silver Creek residents who'd shown up this morning, still moving in and out of the lot, some staying, some going back to their own businesses with the intention of returning." "What do you think?" Ethan almost smiled. "Almost." DuPont put his hat back on. "I'll need a formal statement from you this week. Document everything from the beginning. Don't leave anything out that demands. Each incident. The night of the attack. All of it." He extended his hand. "And I'd like to buy you a cup of coffee sometime when this has had a chance to settle. If you're willing." Ethan shook his hand. "I'm willing." DuPont left. Rosa appeared from the office doorway the moment the sheriff's truck cleared the lot. She had the look of someone who'd been listening from a careful distance and making no effort to pretend otherwise. "He apologized," she said. "He did. I didn't expect that." "Neither did I," Ethan said. She came to stand beside him, and they were quiet together for a moment, the way people are quiet when a significant thing has just passed through the room. Then she said, "The Millfield Hardware Store. Garrett's his name. Dutch reached him about 40 minutes ago. He's already called Teller's firm." She paused. He cried, when Dutch told him what the violations had been. That they were manufactured. Another pause. Dutch apparently just stood there and let him. Didn't try to know, Ethan said. Dutch wouldn't. He just stood there, Rosa said again, like she was still processing it. And Garrett cried. And then Garrett called the number. She looked at Ethan. There's going to be a lot of calls like that, isn't there? As this opens up, probably, Ethan said. Is that hard? She said. Knowing all this was under the surface and you didn't. Yes, he said, immediately, without dressing it up. Yes, it's hard. He looked at the garage, the work, the people who'd come and were still coming. I keep thinking about the Reyes family, about what Miguel kept saying, that the violations didn't make sense, that they knew something was wrong, but couldn't see it clearly enough to fight it. He stopped. That's the worst part, not knowing what you're up against. He's fighting something that won't show its face. Rosa put a hand briefly on his arm. He's left it there for 3 seconds. Took it away. You made it show its face, she said. By not moving, he didn't answer, but he heard it. At 2 in the afternoon, the first unexpected thing happened. A truck pulled into the lot that Ethan didn't recognize. He's an older model, well-maintained, with a camper shell on the back. It parked, and a man got out mid-60s, compact and deliberate in his movements, with gray at his temples and hands that had the look of someone who worked with them. He stood beside his truck for a moment, looking at the lot, at the riders, at the garage, like he was orienting himself. One of the riders near the entrance approached him, just to check. And the man said something, and the rider stepped back and gestured toward the interior. The man walked into the garage. He saw Ethan and stopped. He looked at him for a moment. You James Walker's boy? Yes, sir, Ethan said. Miguel Reyes, the man said. My wife called me after she talked to you. I was 2 hours away at my brother's place. He looked around the garage. I drove. Ethan extended his hand. Miguel Reyes took it. His grip was the grip of a man who'd worked land and equipment his whole life firm without performance, the handshake of someone for whom a handshake still meant what it used to mean. I don't know what to say to you, Miguel said, except that I needed to come and say it in person. He looked at Ethan steadily. We lost everything, my wife and I, the business, the property. 18 months we've been trying to figure out what we did wrong, what we missed, what we could have done differently. His voice was even. He's completely controlled, which somehow made it harder to hear. Finding out this morning that we didn't do anything wrong. That someone deliberately, he stopped. It's a complicated thing, Mr. Walker. Finding out you weren't wrong, that there was nothing you could have done. Because part of you is relieved, and part of you is. He's furious, Ethan said. Yes, Miguel said. Yes, exactly. They stood in the garage, and the understanding between them was immediate and clean. The kind that exists between people who've been through adjacent versions of the same thing. Your wife said you're calling the sheriff's office, Ethan said. He's already did, Miguel said, from the road. I spoke with someone named DuPont. He told me the same things you told my wife. He paused. He said Teller's firm is taking property cases for victims of the assessor operation. I said we couldn't afford, he said pro bono. Miguel stopped again. Someone paid for that. Ethan said nothing. Miguel looked at him. Then around the lot, at the riders, back at Ethan. Someone paid for it, he said again. Not a question this time. People here want to help, Ethan said. Let them. Miguel absorbed this. He nodded slowly. He turned and looked at the Sportster in progress on Sarah's careful layout. He walked to it. He stood over the pieces for a long moment. Is your father's? Yes. You're rebuilding it? Yes. My father had a bike, Miguel said. He looked at the Ironhead engine. He always said a machine that someone loves never really dies. It just waits. He looked at Ethan. He was right. Something moved through Ethan's chest that had nothing to do with his ribs. You want to help put it back together? Ethan said. Miguel looked at him. He blinked once. Then he said, tell me where to start. By 3 in the afternoon, the garage was running like it hadn't run since before Victor Kane's first men walked through the doors. Both lifts were operational. The tools were organized. The customer vehicles that had been affected, 3 of them, sitting in the lot with minor damage from the night of the attack, had been assessed, and the repair work had been started by riders who, between them, carried about 2 centuries of mechanical experience. Harold Briggs had made a call to 2 members of the county board. Those board members had made calls of their own. By 4 o'clock, a county supervisor named Patricia Oakes arrived at the garage, not officially. She stressed, but because she'd heard what was happening and believed she needed to understand it directly. She was 60. Sharp-eyed, with the bearing of a woman who'd been navigating political environments for 30 years and had retained both her principles and her pragmatism, which was rarer than it should have been. She asked Ethan to walk her through the full sequence of events. He did. She listened without interrupting, which was its own kind of statement. When he finished, she said, "The assessor's office has been under my committee's oversight jurisdiction for 3 years. This what Kane's statement revealed. The manufactured violations, this should have shown up in our audits." It didn't, Ethan said. No, she said, flatly, without excuse. It didn't, which means either our audit process has gaps or someone in the process was also compromised. She looked at him. I'm going to find out which. Personally, she looked around the garage. At Miguel Reyes working beside Sarah on the Sportster. At the riders and the townspeople working side by side. At the whole unlikely thing that had assembled itself in this lot on this day. Mr. Walker, I'm going to tell you something that I probably shouldn't say officially, but that I believe is true. What happened here today, the way this community responded, the way this information came out, this is how accountability actually works. Not through the mechanisms alone, through people who refuse to be invisible. Ethan looked at her. I didn't do anything large. You didn't move, she said. In my experience, not moving when everything is pushing you to move is one of the largest things a person can do. She left her card. She shook his hand. She said she would be in contact with Teller's firm and with Sheriff DuPont, and that her committee would be opening a formal review of the assessor's office audit procedures within the week. She left. Rosa watched her go from the office doorway. She's the real thing, she said. You can tell. I think so, Ethan agreed. This is getting large, Rosa said, larger than the garage. Yes, does that scare you? Ethan thought about it honestly. It would have this morning, he said. Less now. Why less? He looked at the garage, at Miguel Reyes's hands on his father's engine, at Sarah explaining something to him, pointing, showing, at Dale Whitmore sitting outside with Tommy Reeves and 2 of the riders, all 4 of them with coffee cups, talking easily, at Harold Briggs's hat on the workbench beside the photograph, which Harold had set there when he rolled up his sleeves to help with the inventory and hadn't moved since. Because all of this happened, he said, and I didn't have to become something different to make it happen. I just had to stay. Rosa was quiet for a moment. Then she said, your father would say something insufferably wise about that. Yes, Ethan said, he would. She laughed. It was small and quick, but it was real. And in the middle of everything that day had been, it was the sound of something breathing normally again. The second unexpected thing happened at 4:45. Darren walked into the garage alone. He came without announcement, without Victor, without any of the crew he'd been part of for 6 years. He walked in wearing plain clothes, not the button-down of the business presentation, just jeans and a jacket, and he looked fundamentally different without the architecture of Victor's operation around him. Smaller in some ways, more real in others. He found Ethan, and he stood in front of him with the posture of a man who has made a decision that cost him something and is not going to walk it back. I want to talk to you, Darren said. All right, Ethan said. Marcus appeared from somewhere in the garage, because Marcus had a quality of awareness that meant he was always present at the moments that mattered. He stood at a distance far enough to be out of the conversation, close enough to be visible. Darren glanced at him, then back at Ethan. I'm the one who cut the fuel line on your customer's truck, Darren said. The second incident. Victor told me to do something that would send a message without destroying anything. I cut the line. He stopped. I'm telling you that directly because I think you deserve to hear it directly. Ethan looked at him. He said nothing. I want you to know that I gave that information to the sheriff this morning as part of the statement process, Darren said. It's on the record. Whatever comes of that, I'm not trying to avoid it. He looked at the garage. At the work in progress around them. When Victor went after your father's bike, he stopped. His jaw moved. That was past what I signed on for. I want you to know I walked out of the building when that happened. I was outside. I didn't touch it. But you didn't stop it, Ethan said. No, Darren said. I didn't stop it. He met Ethan's eyes. I should have. Ethan looked at him for a long moment. At the face of a man who had been in the room while something happened that he knew was wrong. And who had calculated, and who had chosen the calculation over the conscience, and who was now standing in the aftermath of that choice with nowhere comfortable to stand. Why are you telling me this? Ethan said. Because you deserve to know the whole picture, Darren said. Not the version Victor tells, which is going to minimize everything. The actual version. He paused. And because I know what it is to be on the wrong side of someone's loyalty. I've been there. I know what it costs the person on the other end. He looked at the photograph above the workbench. That's your father? Yes, he raised someone who didn't break, Darren said. That's not a small thing. He turned back to Ethan. I don't expect anything from telling you this. I'm not looking for forgiveness or absolution or any of that. I just needed you to know the real version. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Are you going to be all right? Ethan said. Darren blinked. It was clearly not what he'd expected. Yes, I'll be all right. Where are you going to go? Away from here, Darren said. Somewhere I can start from scratch. I've done it before. He looked at his hands. I'm not going to say I'll do better. Saying it doesn't mean anything. Doing it does. Yes, Ethan said. That's true. Darren looked at him one more time. Then he looked at Marcus, who was standing still as stone across the garage. He nodded once at Marcus' acknowledgement, not apology, just the nod of a man marking a moment clearly. Marcus returned it. Brief, even. Marcus walked over. He stood beside Ethan and watched the empty doorway. That took something, Marcus said. Yes, Ethan said. What are you going to do with it? Ethan looked at the doorway, at the empty space where Darren had been standing. At the lot beyond where a man was walking to his car with the particular gait of someone who has put something down that was heavy and doesn't entirely know what to do with his hands now that they're empty. Nothing, Ethan said. He said what he came to say. He told the sheriff the truth. That's what I would have wanted. He looked at Marcus. What more would I do? Marcus looked at him with that expression again, the one that was calm and knowing and fully present. Your father, he said almost that exact sentence to me once. Different situation, same words. He shook his head. Almost exactly. The day was moving toward its end. The Arizona sun was doing what it did at this hour, going warm and low and gold, throwing fonchu through the open bay doors and across the garage floor. The work was mostly done. The tools were ordered. Both lifts were operational. The customer vehicles were repaired. The Sportster was still in progress. It would take more than a day, but the pieces were cataloged and organized, and a plan was in place. Ethan stood in the middle of the garage and looked at what the day had built. Miguel Reyes was still there, talking with Sarah, their voices low and the Sportster between them like a patient in recovery. Dale Whitmore was helping one of the riders pack up equipment. Tommy Reeves had gone home an hour ago and come back with sandwiches for everyone, which was so purely Tommy that nobody had commented on it. Harold Briggs's hat was still on the workbench. Carla Norton came in from outside and said, I'm going to open the diner 2 hours late tomorrow. I figure that's my right. She looked at Ethan. You should come eat. Bring whoever's still here. Breakfast on me. Carla, Ethan said. Don't, she said. Don't argue. Don't offer to pay. Just come eat. He looked at her. She looked back at him with the specific expression of a woman who has made decisions and is not accepting discussion. All right, he said, thank you. She nodded and went back outside. Marcus came to stand beside Ethan one more time as the day wound down around them. The formation was beginning to prepare for the ride out, not all at once, not in a rush, but the natural gathering of people who have finished something and are finding their way back to the road. We'll ride out within the hour, Marcus said. I know, Ethan said. You're going to be all right here, Marcus said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Ethan said, I am. Marcus looked at him one final time with that expression that was grief and satisfaction and memory all layered together. And then he said something quietly. Just for Ethan. Just in this moment. He would be so proud of you. I want you to hear that from someone who knew him. He paused. Not proud of the fight. Not proud of surviving it. Proud of the man you are when nobody's watching. The way you run this place. The people you help. The fuel line you floated for the Whitmore family. The Reyes phone call. All of it. He met Ethan's eyes. James knew. He told me years ago. He said his boy was going to be something. He said it with his whole chest. Ethan pressed his hand flat on the workbench and he looked at the photograph of his father, and he breathed through the pain in his ribs and through the other pain that was not physical at all, and he said nothing for a long moment. Then he said, tell the people who came today, tell them I know what this was. Tell them I understand what 140 riders through the night means. I may never be able to repay it, but I will spend the rest of my life trying to deserve it. Marcus was quiet. Will you tell them that? Ethan said. I'll tell them, Marcus said. But Ethan, he put his hand one final time on Ethan's shoulder. You already deserve it. You earned this before you ever needed it. That's how it works. He stepped back. He looked at the garage, one full time the whole thing. Bay to bay. Wall to wall. The photograph. The Sportster. The tools in their rightful order. Your father built something worth protecting, he said. Yes, and you built it bigger. Don't forget that. He walked to his bike. He mounted. Yes, one by one the engine started. Yes, that accumulated thunder that had rolled out of the desert at dawn, beginning its reversal. Is the formation rebuilding itself on the highway, pointed north and west toward Flagstaff and Tucson and Nogales and all the other points of the compass that these people had ridden from. Ethan stood in the doorway of his garage and watched them go. Rosa came to stand beside him. Miguel Reyes came and stood on his other side. Dale Whitmore and Tommy Reeves came out of the garage and stood behind them. And the people of Silver Creek watched 140 Hells Angels ride back into the Arizona evening the way they'd come, with purpose and organization and the particular dignity of people who know what they stand for and have just finished standing for it. The last bike went around the curve of the highway, and the sound began to fade until the desert was quiet again. Until Silver Creek was just Silver Creek, the diner and the hardware store and the feed store and the garage with the hand-painted sign, the hydraulic lift that groaned when you used it, the 3 bays, the photograph above the workbench. Just a garage, but entirely itself. Ethan turned back inside. He walked to the Sportster. He crouched beside it, carefully, favoring his left side. He picked up the chrome fender. He turned it over in his hands. The scratch ran 3 inches across the surface, not deep, not through the chrome. Just a surface abrasion that could be worked out with the right compound and patience. He set it gently back in its place. He put his hand on the engine casing the Ironhead engine his father had sourced from an estate sale in New Mexico and rebuilt twice and passed down to a garage in Silver Creek where it had waited 3 years to run again. The metal was warm from the Arizona afternoon. Ethan kept his hand there. He breathed ease. And the evening came down over Walker's garage like something laying itself to rest. And the work wasn't finished. But enough had been done that what remained felt like promise rather than burden. And the photograph of James Walker hung above the workbench where it had always hung, and his hand was still raised, and his face was still caught mid-law. And for the first time in a very long time, Ethan Walker did not feel alone inside his father's garage. Part 5. What remains $40,000 arrived in the account Rosa had set up on Thursday morning at 9:42. She stood in the office doorway and looked at her phone screen for a long moment before she walked into the garage and handed the phone to Ethan without saying anything. He looked at the number. He handed the phone back. That's real, Rosa said. Yes. What are you going to do with it? Ethan picked up the carburetor he'd been rebuilding and turned it over in his hands. He'd been thinking about this since Marcus had told him the number on Wednesday. He'd had 2 days to sit with it, and the answer had come to him the way answers come when you've stopped trying to force them, quietly, completely, without drama. Parts for the Sportster first. Whatever that costs, it comes out of this. Then the lift needs a full service, not just the line repair. Then I want to set aside enough to cover 6 months of labor float for customers who can't pay. Rosa stared at him. The entire 6 months float out of this money. Victor Kane's money paying for the people. Victor Kane's operation hurt, Ethan said. That seems right to me. Rosa was quiet for a moment. It is right, she said. It's completely right. She looked at the phone. What's left after all that? Depends on parts costs, Ethan said. Whatever's left, I want to send to Teller's firm. Toward the pro bono fund for the assessor victims. Rosa didn't say anything for a long moment. She stood in the doorway and looked at him with an expression that had several things in it simultaneously: respect, exasperation, affection, the particular brand of fondness that comes from knowing someone well enough to see exactly who they are and having made your peace with it. You know, most people, she said carefully, would keep some of it. I'm not most people, Ethan said. No, she said. You're genuinely not. She turned back to the office. At the door, she stopped. Ethan. For what it's worth, your father would have done the exact same thing, and I would have said the exact same thing to him about it. She went back to the desk. Ethan held the carburetor and looked at the Sportster and thought about his father for a while. Not with grief this time, with something closer to conversation. The internal kind, the kind that doesn't require the other person to be present, because after a certain number of years, you know them well enough to have both sides of the dialogue yourself. He thought, Dad, I gave the money away, and he heard, clear as a wrench hitting concrete. Good. What else would you do with it? He smiled, just slightly, and went back to work. The part for the carburetor cover came in from the Tucson dealer on Friday. The dealer had, as Sarah predicted, been initially resistant to the rush order. Dutch had made one call, the part shipped same day. Ethan didn't ask what Dutch had said, and Dutch, when he called to confirm the shipment, didn't volunteer it. Some conversations are understood to be complete without the details. Miguel Reyes had come back Thursday. He came with his wife, Elena, who was a quiet woman with deliberate eyes and the posture of someone who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and was only now allowing herself to set it down. Ease. She walked into the garage and she looked at the Sportster pieces, laid out in Sarah's careful organization. And she looked at the photograph above the workbench, and she looked at Ethan for a moment. Then she said, "Can I see where it happened?" Ethan understood what she meant. She wasn't asking to see the scene of the attack. She was asking to stand in the place where something had not broken, where someone had been put on the floor and had not given the people who put him there what they wanted. He walked her to the spot, first bay, near the workbench. The concrete floor, ordinary and oil-stained, utterly unremarkable to look at. She stood there for a moment. She put her hand on the workbench, the same place Ethan put his own hand when he needed to feel something solid. She looked at the floor. "Miguel told me you didn't make a sound," she said. "No, why not?" Ethan thought about it. "'Cause they wanted it," he said. The sound. They wanted proof that they'd gotten through. He paused, and they hadn't. So there was nothing to prove. Elena Reyes looked at him with the expression of someone filing something away for keeps. "My grandfather used to say that silence is sometimes the loudest thing a person can say." "My father said something like that," Ethan said. She nodded. She took her hand off the workbench. She straightened. Whatever she'd come to understand by standing in that spot, she had it now. "What can we do?" she said, "while we wait for the legal process?" "What can we do here?" "Miguel's been helping with the Sportster," Ethan said. "I mean beyond that," she said. "I mean, what does this place need?" Ethan looked at her, at the steadiness in her, at the particular quality of a person who has been through loss and come out the other side not softer but clearer, knowing exactly what matters and what doesn't. "The cracked bay window," he said. "I've been meaning to fix it for 2 months. He's never had the time. Miguel does glass work," she said. "His cousin's shop in Tucson. We can get the material at cost." "That's too much," Ethan said. "You called us the same day you found out," Elena said. Her voice was very even. "The same day. You didn't wait to see how things settled. You called us immediately." She looked at him steadily. "You don't get to tell us what's too much." Ethan was quiet. "The window," she said. "Miguel will have it measured today." The formal charges against Victor Kane were filed on Friday afternoon. 3 counts of criminal extortion, 2 counts of assault causing bodily harm, 1 count of destruction of property. His cooperation with the sheriff's department regarding the assessor's office operation was noted in the filing, but did not eliminate the charges. It reduced the recommended sentencing exposure, which was not the same as walking free and was not intended to be. Sheriff DuPont had been clear about that in his communication with Ethan, which he sent by email with unusual directness for official correspondence. Kane faces real time. His cooperation helps the larger investigation, but doesn't buy him out of what he did to you and your shop. That's how it should work, and that's how it's going to work. Ethan read the email twice. He forwarded it to Rosa without comment. She forwarded it to Tommy Reeves with the subject line, "Told you." Tommy Reeves replied with a single word, "Good." The deputy assessor's charges were more substantial, a 12-count indictment that touched 4 counties and implicated 2 additional officials who had known about the manufactured violation scheme and had either participated in it or looked away. County Supervisor Patricia Oakes held a press briefing on Friday that Ethan did not attend, but that Rosa watched on her phone in the office while simultaneously managing the intake paperwork for 3 new customer vehicles. She came out twice to give Ethan updates. She named the garage, Rosa said the first time. In the briefing, she said a local business owner's refusal to be pushed out is what exposed the full operation. "She shouldn't have done that," Ethan said. "He was under the Peterbilt cab he'd been working on the morning. Victor's men first walked in nearly 3 weeks ago. The brake line work he'd been doing was long since finished. He was back under it for a customer with a new issue, which felt like the most normal thing in the world." "She's right, though," Rosa said. "Doesn't mean she should have said it publicly," Ethan said. "This isn't about me. It is partially about you," Rosa said. "Partially," Ethan said. "Partially is not the same as centerpiece." Rosa made her not agreement, not protest sound and went back to the office. The second time she came out, she said, Teller's firm is mentioned as providing pro bono counsel to victims. 3 reporters have already called the firm according to the news crawl. She paused. Ethan, this is going to bring attention. He rolled out from under the truck. What kind? The kind that comes when a story has the right shape, she said. Small business owner, corrupt officials, community response. She looked at him carefully. The Hell's Angels part. Ethan sat up on the creeper and looked at the ceiling and thought about Marcus, who had ridden through the night with 140 people and had stood in Victor Kane's rented living room and had been entirely transparent with the law from the first call at 3 in the morning. He thought about what it would mean for that story to be told publicly, correctly or incorrectly, by people who needed a narrative and who might not get every piece of it right. Marcus should know, Ethan said, before it runs anywhere. I'll call him, Rosa said. I'll call him, Ethan said. It should come from me, he called Marcus that afternoon. Marcus picked up on the second ring, which was becoming a pattern that Ethan recognized as intentional. The man was available to him in a way that was deliberate and quiet, not announced or performed. There's going to be press attention, Ethan said. The Oaks briefing. It's going to lead people to the full story. I know, Marcus said. I've already had 2 calls. From one regional paper. One someone who said they were writing for a national outlet. He paused. I didn't speak to either of them. What do you want to do? That's your question to answer first, Marcus said. It's your garage, your town, your story. He paused. What do you want? Ethan thought about it. He stood in the garage and looked at the photograph of his father and thought about what James Walker would want and what was right and what would actually serve the people who needed serving: the Reyes family, Garrett in Millfield, the other victims still being identified as the investigation opened wider. He thought about whether visibility helped or complicated that. The victims need to be visible, Ethan said. They need people to know what happened to them. That helps the legal process. That brings attention to what the assessor's office did. He paused. The garage doesn't need to be the story. The garage is part of the story, Marcus said. You can't entirely separate them. No, Ethan agreed. But I can be careful about what I say and how I say it. He paused. I want to talk to the Reyes family first. Before I talk to anyone with a recorder, I want them to know what's coming and to have the choice about whether they want to speak. Marcus was quiet for a moment. You know, he said, most people in your position, having just been through what you were, through their first instinct is to tell their own story. Get their version out, make sure they're understood correctly. I know, Ethan said, and yours is to call Miguel and Elena Reyes. They lost more than I did, Ethan said simply. Their story matters more. Another pause, longer this time. Then Marcus said, when your father was in the hospital that night. When I came around. One of my people asked him why he'd stopped. For a biker, he didn't know, in the middle of the night, in the snow, he stopped. Your father said, I stopped because he needed stopping for. That was his whole answer. A pause. You just gave me the same answer. In different words. Ethan didn't say anything. I'll handle the press on our end, Marcus said. If they come to us, they'll get a statement that's brief and factual and redirects to the sheriff's investigation. Nothing that makes this into something it wasn't. He paused. What it was people doing what people are supposed to do for each other. That's the whole story. Anything that inflates it past that is someone else's narrative, not ours. Agreed, Ethan said. Take care of your ribs, Marcus said. And call me when the Sportster runs. He hung up. Ethan stood in his garage and held his phone and felt the full weight of the week behind him and the full weight of what was still in front of him. And for the first time since Victor Kane had first sent his men through the door, both weights felt manageable. Not light, not gone, just manageable. The kind of weight a man can carry if he's standing correctly. The biggest twist of everything, the one nobody had anticipated, came on the following Tuesday. Ethan was at the workbench when Rosa appeared in the bay doorway with a look on her face that he'd never seen from her before. Not the controlled urgency she'd used when she told him about the assessor. Not the careful steadiness she'd worn through all of the last week. This was something else, something that had gotten fully past her composure before she'd had a chance to manage it. Ethan, she said. He turned. Patricia Oaks's committee, she said. Their audit of the assessor's office. She stopped. She looked at her phone, then at him. They found something. What did they find? The manufactured violations against your garage, she said. The ones that were created but never actually filed. Kane was going to use them as additional pressure if you didn't sell. They were already in the system, ready to go. She paused. The committee found them in the assessor's database during the audit. And when they traced the access log for who created them, she stopped again. He's Rosa, Ethan said. It wasn't the deputy assessor, she said. It was someone else. A third person in the office who nobody had identified yet. Someone who'd been placing these prepared violations against multiple properties for 2 years. She looked at her phone. Then at him. Ethan. The third person, the one who built the violation against your garage, he had your father's name in the file. He's not yours, James Walker. Her voice was very steady. She was working hard to keep it that way. He'd tried to run a version of this operation against this property before. Years ago, before you took over, the garage went completely silent. Ethan stood at the workbench with a wrench in his hand, and he processed what Rosa had just said. Someone had targeted this property before, while his father was alive. James Walker had owned this garage, and someone had tried to manufacture reasons to take it from him. And James had never told Ethan. And either James had never known, or James had known and handled it quietly in some way that Ethan had never seen. And the fact that the garage was still standing when James died meant that whatever that had been, James had weathered it. He knew, Ethan said. We don't know that Rosa started. He knew, Ethan said again, more certain. My father knew someone had been at this property. He knew this garage had a target on it. He set down the wrench very carefully. He put both hands flat on the workbench. He never told me. He didn't want you to be afraid of it, Rosa said quietly. That would be why. Or he handled it himself and considered it done, Ethan said. He thought about his father, about the man in the photograph, about the card in the drawer with the phone number that James had kept and that Ethan had been told to use for real trouble. He thought about whether James had used that number himself years before, whether Marcus knew something about a situation involving this property that he hadn't mentioned because it wasn't his to mention. He picked up his phone and called Marcus. Marcus answered on the second ring. Did you know, Ethan said. No preamble. About someone targeting my father's property before he died. A pause. The kind of pause that has content in it. He's Marcus, Ethan said. Your father called me once, Marcus said. About 3 years before he passed. Someone had been putting pressure on the property. Not the same way Kane did, quieter, through paperwork, through regulatory channels. He's trying to manufacture reasons for the county to force a sale. He paused. James had figured out it was someone in the county system, but couldn't identify who. He called me to ask if I knew anyone in county administration who could look into it. Did you? I made some calls, Marcus said. The pressure stopped. Whoever was doing it backed off. He stopped. I never found out specifically who it was. The pressure just stopped. And James thanked me and said he considered it closed, and we never spoke of it again. The person who backed off is the same person the committee just identified, Ethan said. He was still in the office. He had my father's name in the violation file. He kept the file live and just changed the name to mine when my father died and I took over. Silence on Marcus's end. He's been waiting, Ethan said, for 2 years, watching the garage, waiting for someone like Victor Kane to come along and give him a reason to activate it. Son of a quietly and with controlled fury. Ethan, I am sorry. I should have dug harder when your father called me. I should have found the name. You stopped the pressure, Ethan said. You did what my father asked. I should have done more. Marcus. Ethan took a breath. You rode through the night with 140 people because Rosa called a number on a card. You've done enough. You've done more than enough. A long pause. The third person, Marcus said. Is he in custody? As of this morning, Rosa said from the doorway. She'd been listening and tracking her phone simultaneously. Yes, Ethan told Marcus, as of this morning. And the violation files, Marcus said. The ones with your father's name. Expunged from the record, Ethan said. Part of the audit cleanup. Oakes's committee is handling it. Another pause. Your father's name is clear, Marcus said. On the record. Yes, Ethan said. He heard something on Marcus's end that wasn't quite a sound, more the quality of a breath released. The particular exhale of a man who has just learned that something that needed to be right has been made right. Good, Marcus said. He said it very quietly. That's good. They were silent for a moment. The two of them. Across the phone connection. Bound by the same man's memory and the same relief at a wrong that had just been quietly corrected. Please call me, Marcus said again when the Sportster runs. I will, Ethan said. He hung up and stood at his workbench and looked at the photograph of his father and thought about a man who had owned a garage and built something honest and weathered a threat quietly and never told his son because the son had been young and James Walker had handled his own burdens the same stubborn way his son would later handle his own. Dad, Ethan said softly. Not grief, not anger, just the sound of a man talking to someone he missed. Please, you could have told me. The garage said nothing. The photograph said nothing. But the Sportster sat in its careful assembly on the workbench, its pieces organized by Sarah's hands and supplemented by Miguel's, and it said what it always said to Ethan, which was, I'm still here. Finished the work. 3 weeks later, the carburetor cover was on. The fenders were polished. The iron head engine had been gone over by Ethan and Miguel together. Each of them learning the other's way of working. Trading the knowledge of the machine between them the way mechanics do through hands. Not words, through the logic of the assembly itself. Miguel had a gift for the electrical system that Ethan respected immediately and told him so, which made Miguel put his head down and work harder in the way of people who aren't used to being told they're good at something. The bay window was fixed. Miguel's cousin from Tucson had done it in 4 hours on a Saturday and refused payment, which Miguel had apologized for, and Elena had not. The garage looked like itself again, better than itself. More itself than it had been before Victor Kane, as if the attack had clarified what the place actually was, by contrast the way a photograph sharpens when you hold it against something dark. Rosa had hired a part-time mechanic named Jesse. He's 24 years old. He's just out of a technical program. Who had stopped at the garage 3 weeks ago with a dead alternator and had mentioned almost as an aside that he was looking for work. And Rosa had looked at Ethan, and Ethan had said start Monday, which was not how responsible hiring worked, and was completely how things actually worked at Walker's garage. Jesse had a quality of focused attention that reminded Ethan of himself at that age, and a willingness to ask questions that Ethan actively encouraged because questions meant learning, and learning meant the work got better. He showed Jesse everything his father had shown him, without abbreviation, without impatience. Why do you show me the why? Jesse asked once, after Ethan had spent 20 minutes explaining the theory behind a repair that Jesse had already successfully completed. Because the how gets you through today, Ethan said. The why gets you through the next 30 years. Jesse thought about it. Your dad teach you that? He taught me everything, Ethan said. The Sportster was ready on a Saturday morning in late April. Ethan had called Marcus the night before to tell him it was ready. Marcus had said he would come down. Ethan had said he didn't need to make that ride just for this. Marcus had said he was going to make that ride just for this. And the conversation had been brief because both men understood each other. Miguel and Elena Reyes arrived at the garage at 8 in the morning. They came because Ethan had called Miguel the previous week and said he wanted him there. Miguel had said he'd be there, and that was the end of that conversation. Rosa was there. Tommy Reeves was there with his coffee in a thermos and his ability to be still for long periods of time. Dale Whitmore came by. Harold Briggs, who had retrieved his hat from the workbench the day after the riders left and had come back twice since then, for no particular reason except to check in, came by. Carla Norton brought food without being asked, which was becoming a recurring fact of Ethan's life that he had stopped arguing with. Sarah rode down from Flagstaff alone. She arrived at 9. Parked her bike in the lot. Came into the garage. Looked at the Sportster. Walked a full circle around it. And said, That's right. That is exactly right. It was the highest praise she'd offered in their entire acquaintance, and Ethan received it as such. At 9:30, Marcus arrived. He came alone, which surprised Ethan until he thought about it and understood this was not a formation. This was a personal visit. This was Marcus Callahan, the man, not Marcus Callahan, the leader of 140 riders. He parked and came into the garage, and he looked at the Sportster, and he stood very still. He walked around it the way Sarah had, slowly, looking at every piece. The chrome fenders polished back to life, the iron head engine sitting solid in the frame. The original paint that Ethan had touched up section by section rather than repainting, because the original paint had been on the bike when his father rode it, and that meant it stayed. The hand grips, the seat recovered in black leather, because the original had cracked beyond saving, but the shape was identical. Marcus stopped at the front of the bike. He put his hand on the headlight housing. He didn't say anything for a moment. James bought this bike the year I met him, Marcus said. I remember when he got it. He called me to say he'd found it, like he was telling me something important. Because to him, it was. He paused. I rode with him on this bike 100 miles once. Long run down through the desert. He was laughing the whole way. He took his hand off the headlight. He looked at Ethan. It looks like it did then. That was the goal, Ethan said. You did it, Marcus said simply. Ethan looked at the Sportster, at the machine that had been his father's and had been in pieces on his floor and was now whole again, more than whole. Alive in the particular way that a restored machine is alive, which is that it holds the intention of every hand that worked on it and every decision that went into making it right. I want to try to start it, Ethan said. Let's start it, Marcus said. The garage went quiet. Everyone found their positions without being directed. Rosa, leaning against the office doorframe. Miguel and Elena side by side near the workbench. Tommy Reeves with his thermos against the wall. Dale and Harold and Carla behind them. Sarah crouching to the right of the bike where she could see the engine directly. Jesse stood near the bay door, the newest person in this room, watching all of it with the alert seriousness of someone who understands he's in the presence of something that matters. Ethan stood beside the Sportster. He looked at the photograph above the workbench one time. Just once. Then he threw his leg over the seat. The position was strange because the bike was his father's dimensions, set for James Walker's frame. Ethan was similar in build but not identical. He adjusted. He put his hands on the grips. He felt the weight of the machine under him, the particular gravity of an iron-head engine waiting to run. He looked at Marcus, who was standing directly in front of the bike, 3 feet away. Marcus gave him one nod. Ethan kicked. The engine turned but didn't catch. He kicked again. It coughed. The carburetor found fuel and then lost it. He adjusted the choke, felt the small mechanical negotiation between fuel and air that he'd tuned by hand over the last 3 days. He waited a breath. He kicked a third time. The iron head caught. The sound was not polished. It was not quiet. It was the sound of an old engine being alive again, after years of waiting, rough at first, unsteady, finding its rhythm the way a person finds their footing after sitting still too long. It coughed once, twice, and then it found itself and it ran. And the garage filled with that sound, that specific, irreplaceable sound of a machine that was built to run and is running. Rosa put her hand over her mouth. Miguel Reyes put his arm around Elena, and she let him. Tommy Reeves looked at his thermos and then looked up at the ceiling, because that was Tommy's way of dealing with moments that got to him. Jesse, the 24-year-old who had come in 3 weeks ago with a dead alternator, stood in the doorway of Walker's garage and listened to the sound and felt something he wouldn't have words for until much later, the feeling of being present at the exact moment when something broken becomes whole. Harold Briggs took off his hat, and Marcus Callahan stood in front of the running Sportster and looked at James Walker's son sit on James Walker's motorcycle, and his face did what it had done. The first morning he'd walked into this lot, that complex human thing that was grief. And relief and memory all layered together, but now with something new over the top of all of it. Something that looked simply like joy. Ethan let the engine run. He let it warm. He adjusted the idle once, small correction, instinctive, and then he left it alone. He sat on the bike and listened to it, and felt it through the grips, and through the seat and through the soles of his boots. He thought about his father. He thought about a man who had stopped on a highway in the snow for a stranger in a leather vest with a Hells Angels patch, and who had driven 40 miles to a hospital, and who had never asked for anything back, and who had built a garage in the desert and filled it with hard work, and given more than he kept and died, knowing his son would carry it forward. He thought about all of it. He let the engine run. Then he looked up at Marcus and said he would have loved to hear that. Marcus didn't answer right away. He looked at the bike, at the engine, at the photograph above the workbench. James Walker's hand raised, face mid-law, caught in a moment that had lasted longer than the moment itself, because someone had thought to photograph it. He knows, Marcus said. He said it without qualification or apology, the way people say things they fully believe. Wherever he is, he knows. Ethan nodded. He let the engine run for another minute, felt every vibration of it, memorized the sound the way he'd memorized everything about the machine, not consciously, not methodically, but the way the body memorizes what the heart decides matters. Then he reached down and turned it off, The garage went quiet again. But it was a different quiet than it had been when the engine started fuller, somehow. The way a room feels different after music has been played in it, even when the music has stopped. The air holds it. The walls hold it. The particular silence after something beautiful is not silence at all. "He's so," Rosa said, from the doorway. Her voice was careful, but her eyes weren't. "He's, what now?" Ethan put the kickstand down and stood up from the bike. He looked around at the people in his garage. At the faces that had come through the last weeks of his life, the ones who'd been there from the beginning and the ones the beginning had brought to him. "Now we open Monday," he said. "We've got 4 vehicles in the lot and Jesse needs to get more time on a full service. And I have a parts order coming in from Albuquerque that needs checking when it arrives." He looked at Miguel. "And I want to teach you how to do an Ironhead tune without a manual. Because the manual doesn't actually have everything in it." Ease. Miguel Reyes looked at him with the expression of a man who has been offered something he didn't expect and isn't going to pretend that he isn't pleased by it. "When?" he said. "Whenever you're ready," Ethan said. "Please, I'm ready now," Miguel said. "Monday?" Elena said firmly from beside her husband. "He'll be ready Monday." "Today we eat the woman's food," she gestured at Carla Norton's setup on the tailgate outside. "And you let these ribs of yours rest for one single afternoon." There was a sound in the garage that was pure and uncomplicated. It was laughter, not the polite kind, not the social kind. Just actual laughter from people who had been through something together and had come out the other side of it into this moment. Food on a tailgate and an engine that ran and a woman telling a mechanic to rest his ribs in the warm April air of Silver Creek. Marcus Callahan laughed with the rest of them. Ethan saw that and felt something that he would have difficulty naming for a long time, after the feeling of understanding that a person you've only recently met has nevertheless been in your life for a very long, carried there by the man who raised you, placed there like a gift that was waiting until you were ready to receive it. They ate outside in the April sun, all of them. The riders and the townspeople and the Reyes family, and Jesse and Tommy Reeves and Harold Briggs with his hat back on his head, and Carla Norton who ate standing up because she always ate standing up, and Rosa, who finally sat down for the first time all day. Marcus sat beside Ethan and they talked about James Walker. Really talked for the first time. Not the careful exchanges of the past week, not the formal transmission of necessary information. Just 2 people who had known the same man and who found, in talking about him, that they brought different angles of the same picture and that together the picture was more complete than either had alone. Marcus told Ethan things he'd never known. Funny things. The story of a road trip in 1989 that had ended with James Walker talking his way out of a situation in New Mexico with a combination of absolute sincerity and complete mechanical expertise that had diffused what should have been a very bad hour. The way James had insisted on cooking whenever they were at the chapter house because he believed that whoever cooked cared about the people eating, and James Walker cared about everyone around him by default, and cooking was just one way of expressing what was already true. He talked about you, Marcus said, constantly, toward the end. I mean, he always mentioned you since you were a kid, but toward the end it was different. He'd gotten quieter about most things. But about you, he was not quiet. He looked at Ethan. He said you were going to do something that mattered. Not something large, something that mattered. He said those are different things and that you understood the difference. Ethan looked at the garage, at the hand-painted sign. At the bay window that was fixed now, solid in its frame. At the Sportster, visible through the open bay door, sitting on its kickstand in the place it had occupied for 3 years while it waited to run. I'm just running a garage, Ethan said. Yes, Marcus said. That's exactly what you're doing. And look, who's here? Ethan looked at all of them, every person on the lot. He looked for a long moment. Yeah, he said softly. Look who's here. In the weeks that followed, Teller's firm filed on behalf of 7 families who had been victims of the assessor's office operation. The Reyes family was among them. The legal process would take time, these things always did, but Oakes's committee had created conditions where the outcome was no longer uncertain, only delayed. Garrett, the hardware store owner in Millfield, reopened his store in a different location after 2 years of closure. He called Ethan to tell him. Ethan said he was glad. Garrett said, I want to come down sometime and shake the hand of the man who didn't move. Ethan said he was welcome anytime. Bring your truck, Ethan said. I'll look it over for free. Garrett laughed. He said, you sound like someone I heard about. Ethan said, my father. Garrett said, yeah. Your father. Victor Kane accepted a plea agreement that included 18 months in a county facility, plus substantial financial restitution to multiple parties, of which Ethan's $40,000 was the most visible but not the largest. His operation in the highway corridor was finished. His arrangement with the county was severed and on record. Darren was not charged. He'd provided too much to the investigation, and the DA had made a decision based on the case as a whole. He left Silver Creek the day after he walked into Ethan's garage. Ethan didn't know where he went and didn't try to find out. Jesse passed his first solo service job on a Thursday, and Rosa gave him a small raise without consulting Ethan, who found out the following Monday and said nothing except that it was the right call. The Sportster stayed at the garage. Ethan had thought about whether to ride it, whether to keep it static as a kind of memorial. He'd asked Marcus during one of their calls what he thought. Marcus had said James would ride it. Ethan said he would. Then what's the question? Marcus said. The question, Ethan understood, was whether he deserved to take that step, whether riding his father's restored motorcycle was honoring James Walker or consuming him. It took him another 2 weeks to understand that James Walker would have considered that distinction ridiculous. The first time Ethan rode the Sportster out of Silver Creek, he went north on the highway toward Flagstaff. It was a Tuesday evening with clear air and long light. He rode for an hour in each direction. He didn't have a destination. He just needed to feel the machine move under him the way it was built to move. He thought about his father the whole way, not with sadness, with the particular sweetness of a memory that no longer has grief attached to it, just the memory itself, clean and present and alive. When he pulled back into the lot, Rosa was locking up the office. She looked at him on the bike, at his face, which she read the way she read everything completely and without fuss. How was it? She said. He sat with the engine still running for a moment. He thought about how to answer, like talking to him, he said. Without needing him to answer. Rosa looked at him for a moment. Then she said, good. She picked up her bag. Lock up tight. I'll see you Monday. She walked to her car. Ethan sat on the Sportster in the empty lot of Walker's garage in Silver Creek, Arizona, and he listened to the Ironhead engine, and he looked at the hand-painted sign, and he thought about everything that had happened and everything that remained. He thought about his father stopping on a highway in the snow for a stranger in a leather vest, and about 140 engines starting in the dark because someone had stopped once and never asked for anything back. He thought about Rosa finding a card in a drawer and making a call that changed everything, and about Miguel Reyes driving 2 hours because his wife had told him someone deserved to hear it in person, and about Harold Briggs taking his hat off at the right moment, and Carla Norton bringing food without being asked, and Tommy Reeves showing up with a shotgun and a thermos and a 30-year instinct for when someone needed to not be alone. He thought about all the people who had shown up, not because they had to, not because they were organized or obligated or paid, but because that was what people did, in the end, when they had been treated well and the time came to answer it. He thought about his father. He thought about the man he was. He thought about the garage, Walker's garage, 1 hydraulic lift, 3 bays, a sign painted by hand, a photograph above the workbench that nobody touched, a Sportster on its kickstand that ran and would keep running. He turned the engine off. The desert went quiet around him. And in Silver Creek, he's on a Tuesday evening in late spring. The last thing Ethan Walker did before he went inside was look up at the hand-painted sign above his door, and understand fully, completely, without remainder, that the most powerful thing a person can build in this world is not a reputation for toughness, and not a network of favors, and not a name that makes people afraid. It is the simple, daily, unglamorous practice of being someone people trust. His father had built that, and Ethan Walker had kept it standing. That was the whole story. That was enough.